transformation careers. Those are just a few things that we're going to talk about in today's episodes of Transformation Ground Control.
This is Transformation Ground Control, your source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 95. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Cheatham. Kyler, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, as always.
Thanks for being here. This is the podcast that we put out each week, every Wednesday, talking about digital transformation strategies and topics ranging from the people, process, technology, and strategy sides of transformation. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. We've got a great show for you planned today. And we're going to start off with some hot topics where we're going to talk about Google X, cybersecurity threats, artificial intelligence, and culture failures in mergers and acquisitions. So we'll cover those three things in our hot topic segment. And then later in the show, we are going to have Khalid Morris on the show. And Kyler, you and I are going to discuss with Khalid some just guidance and recommendations and tips for digital transformation careers in 2023 as people think about how to pivot or upskill themselves or how to position themselves for future career opportunity. We're going to cover all that in the second segment with Khalid, so be sure to stick around for that. And then last but not least, we're going to play you a clip from a recent interview, Kyler, that you had with Wayne Holtham, who is the head of our Third Stage Asia Pacific office. He's based out of Australia. In addition to being the lead of our Third Stage office in Australia or Asia Pacific, he's also somewhat of a food and beverage industry guru. We have a few clients across the board throughout Third Stage globally, but especially in Asia Pacific, we have quite a bit of food and beverage client work that we're doing right now. So we're going to talk about a case study for food and beverage in digital transformation later in the show. So be sure to stick around for that. Before we jump into these hot topics, again, new episodes every Wednesday. Be sure to subscribe to us on audio podcast platforms, and you can find these new episodes every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. So let's jump in. What are these hot topics you've got in store for us today, Kyler?
Yeah, so first talking about kind of emerging technologies in farming or agriculture, specifically when it comes to strawberries. And a lot of this has to do with biogenetics of plants too. So creating the best strawberry crop as possible with the most efficient processes around it. So Google has an innovation lab. It's called X. It uses a variety of innovations. We talked about Google Glass a few episodes back, basically the computer in front of your face. If you know Google Waze, which is basically the same thing as those traffic initiators with different sensors that showcases the fastest way to get something from a GPS standpoint. And they have created another one when it comes to actually supporting sustainability in farming. So if you don't know a lot about strawberry farming, Eric, it takes at least 5 years to develop a new type of berry through testing and different pieces. So it begins usually with a crop of around 25,000 genetically distinct plants. And then it grows into the company's breeding field near its headquarters when it's whittled down to about 250 plants, then cloned and replanted once they have everything kind of worked out to get the plant that they're hoping to get. So mineral is what they actually call the use of Google X's technology. And it's a really closely guarded project because of the innovation around the technology, but it uses cameras and machine learning to help farmers make better decisions. It usually has large unmanned rovers. So think about a smaller self-driving car that are packed with sensors and cameras. They basically drive up and down the crop rows, collecting data, telling farmers which plants are thriving and which ones aren't. So they have the same sort of self-driving car technology, and it features all-terrain wheels, half a dozen camera, all kinds of big kind of souped up, if you will, self-driving cars. Um, it can also be activated via a remote control, and ultimately it lets the company direct themselves by making the best decisions most efficiently and with less labor. It can also monitor pesticides, so less money spent on fertilizers and other chemicals within the plant. And again, this showcases a lot of the technology that's been used in their drones, satellites, and even smartphones. The reason Google has put so much money and allocated into this specific mineral project is because the lack of additional regulations that might be holding back some of their drone-based projects, self-driving cars, those types of different things. So using kind of the agricultural mechanism, which has less compliance, less safety issues, to kind of test those more mainstream technologies. So wanted to get your feedback of kind of testing across industry, looking at an industry that might have less regulations, less compliance, but utilizing the same technology, learning from that, and actually adopting that into more of a mainstream consumer technology that might be emerging in marketplaces, but almost safety checked in other verticals.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to get ahead of the curve, instead of waiting until there is a regulation or a safety requirement. If you can have more of an open greenfield approach to how you might use something like a Google X, that, in my opinion, is ideal. So does Google X then, what exactly does it do in this case? Is it leveraging artificial intelligence, machine learning, and things like that to take big data and get to these conclusions that you were just describing?
Yeah, so Google X is actually the lab that owns all of these umbrella different technologies. So we talk
Okay.
about glass, we talk about ways, we talk about mineral, which is actually what this piece is called, the sensor driven, data collecting, machine learning, self driving sensors that basically showcase the data and are able to manipulate which plants are performing better, as opposed to having to wait those 5 years to perfect that and spend obviously additional costs. So think of it, Google X is the whole overall program. Mineral is what they're hoping to scale from these different
Mhm.
types of learnings without having to go through additional compliance and regulations.
And what's great about that is it's totally transforming business models, or it has the potential to totally transform a business model to where you're not just automating the way you've always done things, but now you're figuring out ways to use technology to really change the way you run your operations and how you service your customers. So I think it's a really cool idea that could be. You can imagine a bunch of different case studies or examples where you might use that sort of an approach in other industries as well.
Yeah, and it has really that business application where it is a true kind of B2B pass through. So Google, the application, the software designer, hardware designer, right, passes it to the agricultural farmer or that institution, as opposed to it being a direct to consumer play that adds, additional issues and complexities around that strategy.
Right. Yeah, it's very cool. It's exciting stuff.
Yeah, I know. So now every time you have a strawberry, you'll think about,
Yeah.
wow, this took 5 years to perfect. And they have,
Yeah.
it's always hard to visualize the case studies on an audio format, but think of it, if you had like a big plate full of strawberries, the actual machine will place boxes around, this one has mildew, this one isn't the optimal size, this one's too one color. So it actually showcases that, points to the most viable, if you want, strawberry, and then uses that to actually create the new plants. So it's interesting,
That
certainly.
is really interesting.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's
So
a good reminder how complex food supply chains can be and how much technology can help it. And that'll, tying back to our third segment later today
mhm.
with the food and beverage case study, it'll be interesting to compare that future state of, what technology could do with what we're actually seeing food and beverage companies do today in our client base too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And kind of moving on to another emerging industry, we obviously have seen cybersecurity kind of, blow up on the scene in different pieces of enterprise tech. And usually at the close of the year is where we see all of the top 10, top six, top five lists coming out for different 2023 strategies, as we're ending 2022 right now. So this is the top cybersecurity threats in 2023 and actually pulled out one that we really haven't talked a lot about on this show that I thought we could kind of dig into, and that's data poisoning.
Hmm.
So, a 2022 IBM study found that 35% of companies were using AI in their business and over 42 were exploring it. So, obviously, the growth of AI, which has opened up new possibilities for, unfortunately, cyber threats. So, the causes of data poisoning in AI have started to appear, and that's a kind of a malicious actor that finds its way into injecting corrupt data into an AI system that will result in that system malfunctioning or losing, or, in worst case scenarios, stealing that data. So they use kind of what's called an attack vector, and maybe you know what that is a little bit better than I do, onto a corporate system. And that's the only way to protect against the continuous AI data poisoning and the monitoring of those overall structures. So I know you talk a lot about that when it comes to emerging technology and those health checks that you need to make sure that you're going through, because it's only as good as the data that's put into it. So wanted to get your feedback on this idea of toxic data or data poisoning, and making sure that enterprises understand and are aware of that when it comes to integrating things like artificial intelligence and machine learning into your overall enterprise technology portfolio.
Well, it's a really important point. I mean, even if you set aside the cybersecurity piece of it, which I know is the whole point of you bringing this up, but even if you set that aside, one of the big challenges with data in general, even if you just look at basic reporting or business intelligence, is that the data behind it may not be good. In your reporting and your analytics and your BI, your business intelligence is only as good as the data behind it. And that's even more true as you step up the ladder here and then start to talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning, where data is even more important. So, first of all, I'd say that organizations have a big enough challenge just trying to get to that next level of having clean data that actually supports machine learning and AI. But then you add to the layer of cybersecurity threat, and that further complicates the whole thing. And so I think having tight data governance in place and data management in place, as well as just cleaning up the data in particular to start, and then also having cybersecurity mechanisms in place to protect that data. It's even more important as you start talking about AI and machine learning, for sure.
What about the diversification of the human component of health checks? So we've seen a lot in the cybersecurity world that has moved towards actually employees as being a cybersecurity threat. So when you're talking about these health checks, should this be a team? Should this be one person? Should this be a variety of levels within the organization? What should that look like?
Well, it depends on how big the company is, or how complex your organization is and how you're structured. But in general, you're right. You want to have strong data governance in place and data management processes to where you're controlling that data, managing the data, even, not just from nefarious actors or people that are trying to corrupt the data, but also just broken processes or human errors that cause corruption to the data. So if you can put in place strong data governance and data management processes that help achieve that, then, to me, that's the sort of the gold standard of how you get to that data cleanliness, or how you preserve that data cleanliness and preserve the security of that data. But as far as the size of the team on those health checks, it really just depends on how big the company is and how big the IT department is and how much data and how many systems you're talking about too.
Yeah, and I guess just having that awareness that, unfortunately, that becomes a real reality, that you just need to have the awareness around that risk mitigation when it comes to cybersecurity, and understanding, the internal needs to kind of monitor that throughout the organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, speaking of huge threats, literally, AI and dinosaurs. So this is actually out of Brisbane. So a focus on our Australian audience today, with not only our hot topics but also having Wayne on. But so large dinosaur footprints were discovered back in the 1970s, and they're called the Dinosaur Stampede National Monument in Queensland, Australia. And so it's the stampede, think of it as a couple humongous big dinosaur footprints and a lot of little dinosaur footprints. So a lot of dinosaur scientists and archaeologists assumed that big dinosaur caused that because it was a large predator. So what happened is they utilized AI to actually model what the dinosaur would look like, and found it was actually just a very large herbivore, as opposed to a carnivore when it comes to causing the stampede. Um, so this program is actually called deep convolutional neural networks. That's the
Wait, what?
actual name of it. It's a mouthful. And it was
Wow.
trained off of 1,500 dinosaur footprints, which were all from different origins and different types of dinosaurs. And the results were clear. It was a large herbivore dinosaur. So without modern technology, they would have never been able to establish that piece in history. So there were three researchers on the team. One thought it was a pro meat eater, as they called it. One person was undecided, and one was a pro plant eater. So really, the technology was able to take the human science to the next level to actually give an answer of what that was like in modern history. So another kind of fun use of AI that's taught us a lot about the history of not only our planet, but species through data and being able to model out what that actually looked like. So still not clear why the stampede happened, as nobody was getting eaten at that point, but still a
Right.
very large dinosaur and some very small dinosaurs running around Brisbane, Australia.
Good to know if dinosaurs ever make a resurgence here on Earth. We've got the AI to potentially protect us. It makes you wonder, like, with all this historic use of historic data in AI, things like you start to think about things like climate change. Speaking of dinosaurs and why they died, presumably, you think about climate change and what are the correlations or the things that are actually driving climate change, and really better understanding that using more accurate data or more accurate models. I think that would be super interesting. So there's a lot in history and where we're headed in the world that could potentially benefit from AI. So that's super interesting.
Yeah, and even thinking, bringing it back to kind of what we talk about here, but business technology, having the opportunity to model out a future state, I assume would be very helpful when we're talking about things like target operating models or specific manufacturing, product manufacturing, those types of different industries. It seems like it would be efficient in the fact that it gives you the opportunity to kind of test those and manipulate data points without actually, wasting a ton of time and materials.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, good. Well, let's move to our last hot topic here, which is culture failures kill mergers. So I was doing some research. A lot of times at the end of the year, like I said, bigger annual reports come out specifically on digital transformation and culture and attaching those metrics. And I came across a case study that I wanted to share. That's kind of a mainstream failure when it comes to not investing in organizational culture, which led to failures. Daimler and Chrysler merged. Daimler acquired Chrysler in 1998, two automotive companies. And the individual corporate cultures clashed so bad that it ultimately led to a failure. And by 2007, the company split because they could not seem to integrate the two different cultures. They were both working with their respective organizations and are independent. And so you talk about American versus German, and nobody took the time to consider what that would mean as far as a new unified corporate culture, individual values, unique legacies, those different pieces, and plan that out before the acquisition took place. So it led to a loss in not only the merger acquisition, but a bunch of time and money, because a company did not effectively invest in a planning around an M&A culture assimilation. So as someone who is an expert specifically in assimilating technologies and a technology portfolio for mergers and acquisitions, but also understanding the importance of organizational change, kind of that heightened atmosphere in those types of specific ecosystems. I wonder if you could kind of give us your 2 cents on what happens to organizations if they don't really take into consideration the ROI of culture when they are looking at going through a big transformation or specifically a merger and acquisition.
Yeah, I mean, it can lead to a lot of problems, as demonstrated by that case study with Daimler Chrysler, especially when you've got two large companies like that that are really well established, have been around for a long time. they're rooted in different cultures. They've grown up over decades, and that makes culture that much harder to change. And it's not to say that Daimler Chrysler should never have merged. That's not necessarily the case, but it does suggest that maybe they should have been more deliberate about understanding what those cultural nuances or differences were. And that probably would have affected the value or the perceived value. Because if you would have done it right, you would have invested a lot more time and money in getting the culture right, which, doesn't happen overnight, requires a lot of change management, takes time and cost, all that good stuff. But there's other examples too, like around that same time in I think it was the late 90s, AOL and Time Warner merged. And you had like AOL at the time was for those who don't remember, America Online was the internet provider, kind of like the Google of the 90s. So you had AOL, and then Time Warner, which is a old school traditional media company, combining with a high tech innovative company, which AOL actually was innovative at one point in time. And a tech based company, you try to merge those two things, and that didn't work either. There's a lot of cultural clash there. There's a lot of lost shareholder value. Company didn't do well longer term, and I think they've since spun off or kind of gone reverse backwards on that whole merger. But it goes to show that the bigger the company, the higher the stakes, the more important it is, because it's harder to change those cultures, and you just have to understand why that is. And I do remember, I was getting my master's degree right around that time when Daimler Chrysler merged and when AOL Time Warner merged, and I was getting my MBA, and that was a big part of what we studied was culture and integrating operations and how difficult M&A can be due to cultural conflicts.
Absolutely. Yeah. Investing the time in kind of that post-merger organizational culture and avoiding that disruption seems to be a main strategy that sometimes doesn't always come to the forefront unless it is a very public failure. And that can happen in any size and any complexity of organization.
Yeah. Although I would say it's a little bit easier when it's a big company buying a smaller company. You hate to say it, but you can impose the big company's culture onto the smaller company easier than if you're trying to merge two equals. But having said that, it's still really important, because even if you think you're just going to impose your will culturally on an acquisition, the last thing you want is to lose employees and to disrupt that culture that made them successful and made them an attractive target for you to buy. So really being deliberate about what is it we want this combined entity to be going forward when all is said and done, that's something that should be part of the due diligence. But the problem is you get a lot of private equity and finance types that are looking at dollars and cents, and they're not connecting the dots between cultural integration and shareholder value or merger and acquisition value.
Do you think with these data points around failure and looking that Harvard Business Review did a study that between 70 and 90 merger and acquisitions failed due to culture, is that something that you feel like is taken into consideration more in the PE world at this point?
I think it is. Yeah, it seems like there's a general awareness of it more so now than 20 or 30 years ago. So yeah, I think there's an awareness, but it's still something that for a lot of people, they don't know what it means. Like, okay, we don't want to fail because of culture, but they don't necessarily know what the prescription is. What's the way to address that? And I think that's, translating the general knowledge into action and due diligence in a M&A situation is, in my opinion, what's missing still today.
And in that due diligence, when the third stage group, when we actually activate on a merger and acquisition, because we help kind of streamline the technical processes, is that something that we kind of look at in the assessment phase of kind of what is culture A versus what is culture B, and how will that influence what software we select or what technology we recommend?
It does, and we're happy to do that. But part of the problem with that model is a lot of times we come into situations where there is a set of assumptions behind the merger or acquisition that we weren't part of, and there's a set of expectations that we weren't a part of setting, and then we come in to execute and help define, now let's figure out how to integrate these companies. And this is, by the way, this is not just true for mergers and acquisitions. It's also true for organic growth. When you grow the company and you set up different business units throughout the world or in different industries, each one's going to have its own subculture. And if you try to combine them, which a lot of organizations do as they get bigger, if and when you go to combine them, then you sometimes run into even just subcultural issues internally within the same company. And so you just have to be real deliberate about it. And ideally, the PE guys and gals they're assessing and doing due diligence up front would do some of that work, or they'd hire someone like us to do it. But typically they don't. And then when it's the merger is already said and done, now they want to consolidate and standardize operations. That's where we come in and then figure out how to put the pieces back together, which in my opinion is more difficult than if you just figure that out up front.
And costly, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, I think that, is a good kind of segue into our conversation when it comes to what are those competencies and what are those needs as a consultant to actually be able to execute on that very big ask when it comes to not only merger and acquisitions, but understanding how technology will affect and influence and hopefully provide value to an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. It's definitely something that even if you're not going through a merger or acquisition, you're just trying to standardize or consolidate operations and organizational roles and responsibilities, that culture piece of it is oftentimes the Achilles heel or the pitfall that organizations fall into. So good stuff. Well, thank you for those hot topics. That's all four of those things are really important as we look to the new year in 23 and beyond. And speaking of 2023 and beyond, we are going to talk about careers in digital transformation. So we wanted to have Khalid Morris, who's a director at Third Stage Consulting here in our U.S. office. He's going to join us to talk with you and I about Third Stage or about digital transformation careers, including if you wanted to work for Third Stage. That's one of the things we'll cover, but more broad than that. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Interested in working for a company that truly values your unique skills and experience? Here at Third Stage, we don't hire based on resumes alone. We look at the full candidate, experience, and willingness to provide excellent service for our clients. Within a technology, independent, and agnostic consulting firm, you have the opportunity to learn across industries with a diverse group of clients. Our consultants also have the opportunity to diversify their portfolio and learn across technology systems. If you're interested in joining a high-growth entrepreneurial organization, please reach out to us at work@thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 95. You can find new episodes of our show every Wednesday on audio podcast platforms throughout the world, including Amazon, Google, Spotify, Apple, etc. So be sure to check us out there, subscribe to the show. You can also find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter every Wednesday. So be sure to check that out. And if you go to our YouTube channel, you can actually go back and watch any of the previous 94 episodes, 94 glorious episodes, I might add. You can check that out on our playlist on either the Third Stage and or my personal YouTube channel. So we want to shift gears a bit, move on from hot topics, and really talk about careers and career growth, career development. And, the holidays, end of year in general, oftentimes is a time when people reflect back on the year. What did they accomplish? What didn't they accomplish? What do they want to accomplish in the new year? So we thought it'd be a good time to have a conversation about how do you advance your career in digital transformation in 23 and beyond. And we wanted to do this from two different angles. We want to do it from the perspective of people that are perhaps they have industry experience, but they haven't, they want to move into IT or consulting, or perhaps if you're a recent college grad and you're looking for a way to break into digital transformation, we want to cover that. And we really want to cover both the angles of different roles, all types of roles within digital transformation. It's a pretty broad field that includes internal team members, internal transformation team members, internal IT department employees, as well as outside consultants. So regardless of where you are, where you want to be in the IT and digital transformation space, we really wanted to have a conversation about some of the lessons and advice we would give to people that are trying to pivot or grow their career in digital transformation. So with that, we thought, Kyler, we'd invite Khalid Morris to the show, who's a director of strategy and transformation here in our U.S. office. He's actually someone I've worked with for 12 or 13 years, two different companies. So he's someone I know really well, and he's a coach as well. He coaches youth sports, so that brings a different perspective as well. And he used to be a competitive athlete at the collegiate level too, which again brings a different perspective, but a really effective one. So we thought we'd have that conversation here. So Khalid, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So I thought it'd be great to have the two of you on the show here today, because I know both of you enjoy some of these topics that we're going to be discussing here today. Kyler, you're a working mom, so you have sort of the angle of how to balance all the various things that moms and working professionals do, as well as just obviously understanding consulting and digital transformation in general. And Khalid, in addition to having extensive consulting background, the reason I thought you'd be interesting to have in this discussion is because you're a coach as well, which I always find fascinating. I think as someone that coaches little kids, or your kids aren't so little anymore, but your younger kids, coaching them in sports, basketball in particular, that coaching mentality, I think, is something that comes in handy when we start talking about careers and how to evolve in one's career. So I guess just to start, just to get the conversation going here, what are some of the skills that you think are most important for the digital transformation space as we look to 2023 and beyond? What are some of the skills and or characteristics that you think it takes to be successful in today's day and age in the digital transformation space? Why don't we start with you, Khalid? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think that digital transformation is a pretty broad kind of space. I think it covers, so many lines. So there's so many different ways to come at it. Technical skills are always great. So again, we'll touch off on which particular ones, I guess, and when it's applicable. But in this case, transformation actually doesn't have a ton to do with kind of these hyper IT sort of skills. It's very business oriented. It's very change oriented. It's having to deal with the business world that's going around you. So really, you can bring into a transformation space kind of broader business skills, broader understanding of how processes work, and re-engineering those particular processes, and then how to talk and work with the staff, the employee base, like the people that are going to be impacted the most. So ironically, I see a lot of HR and a lot of kind of organizational design and change management in the transformation space.
Yeah, good point. I like your point about it being not as technical as you might think. Certainly the technical skills are important, but that business understanding, that business acumen, I would argue, is a stronger foundation to work from, or a stronger foundation to build if you really want to be successful in the digital transformation space. What are your thoughts on that, Kyler?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think there's certain hyper target for technical skills, and that's important as far as a cohesive team. But when it comes to actual transformation, the collaboration and the communication of understanding how technology as a backbone of your organization or institution really touches all of the different departments. So understanding those perspectives and uniting around a really cohesive and clear business strategy is really key. So with that, you need a lot of business technologists and communicators within your transformation team to be able to make sure that you're continuing to maintain your commitment to those strategic goals. And that evolution is something that we've seen in the industry in the last 5 to 10 years become really forefront in making your transformation successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And sort of segueing or building on that comment you just made, Kyler, is Ghassan on LinkedIn was coming in hot here this morning on the conversation with his suggestion that anger management skills might be the most important skill. But even though it's a humorous comment, and I think I know Ghassan, and I think he's probably trying to be 50% funny and 50% serious. But regardless of his intent of that comment, I think he brings up a good point, which is the sort of the emotional intelligence and the EQ required to be successful in digital transformations in general, whether you're an internal leader or a project team member or a consultant helping an organization through a transformation. Khalid, what has some of your experience been in terms of that emotional intelligence, or just sort of the soft skills that are required to be successful in this industry?
There's always a contingent that resists change, like even I think in positive scenarios, but in more negative scenarios, sometimes that contingent is pretty strong. And, conflict resolution, I think, is a very powerful skill set when you're dealing with transformational work, because you really have to, talk groups off the cliff, talk people off the cliff as it relates to some of the shifts that are happening. It's sensitive for them. You may have spent a significant amount of time. You may be the foremost expert in a particular application at your organization, and then the organization comes in and shifts your careers. A lot of people's careers are tied to a specific application.
Mhm.
That's where they feel like they're of value when they're in that application you're talking about, whether it's from a technical perspective or just operational. And so, they're very sensitive about the idea of we're going to make this gigantic shift and everybody's going to start from ground zero. So no one knows the software. So now you have a competition of sort that sort of is happening in the field. And so, yeah, it's an emotional space transformation. That's why communication, to Kyler's point, is huge. A lot of those communication planning skills, Marcom skills are huge in this particular space, just so you can start to speak to some of the concerns, fears that people have when they're dealing with transformation, what's coming, what's around the corner before anything has even been implemented, to be able to start to talk about how you're going to start to tackle this and what the plan is going to look like for success.
Yeah. Makes total sense. What are your thoughts, Kyler?
Yeah, I think building on that, we joke like Gassan, who's always a great listener and contributor who makes us laugh on a weekly basis. So thank you, Gassan, for always bringing that entertainment value. But we joke about how our practitioners in digital transformation are real therapists, because you do have to kind of mine through that resistance that Khalid put on the table, whether it's intentional or not intentional. You have to understand what is kind of the root cause behind that and address it so that you can move forward without disruption or any sort of project issues around what is the team going through, because it is a very high stress environment with a lot of vulnerabilities. And when you think about it from just, an overall human needs standpoint, this is someone's job. It's their livelihood. It's their, the way they provide for their families. So understanding the significance of that fear and how it can, really cause that anxiety in the workplace is something that really has become a true need within a digital transformation process and approach.
Yeah, I totally agree. And Gassan added to the discussion here again, as far as listening skills and negotiation skills being important to transformation. I think that's something that's really important. I mean, I think, especially in consulting, I think that's one thing that I think consultants in general are not good at, but they should be a lot better at, or at least the more successful consultants I've worked with are the ones that can listen the most and really understand the needs of a business. I think one of the problems with our industry in the digital transformation space is we have this mentality in general that we have the answers. We have the best practices. We have the technology. We have a proven solution that will work for your business if you would just, get your own needs out of the way and just use our software. And so it creates this mentality of we don't need to listen because we have best practices. We have the answers. But I think that's highly ineffective, especially from a change management perspective and creating change resistance to the process. And one of the best ways to mitigate resistance to change is to just listen and understand what the needs are. Even if the solution or the answer you come to is the same either way, at least you've listened and you kind of understand what the needs are. So I think that's a really important point too, is, that listening piece of it, in my opinion, it's the most important skill, in my opinion, for being a good consultant. But even just being a project team member, a CIO, a transformation lead, whatever your role might be, especially or change manager, if you're part of the change management team, you really have to listen and understand the needs. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of blowback from the organization, for sure. So Kyler, I know you had some questions too you wanted to ask. So maybe I'll turn it to you to maybe drill Khalid and I a bit on some of your questions for us.
Yeah, good. Can you feel my energy, my moderation energy? It's so hard for me to always be the one not asking the question.
Yeah, I know you're just dying to jump in.
Over here, chomping at the bit, if you will. But I know both of you have had very successful careers in just overall IT consulting, digital transformation consulting, change management consulting, which is now kind of grown into the digital transformation industry holistically. And I wonder if I could ask you, looking into 2023 or in the 2020s and beyond, what are some of those roles that you feel like are really high demand when it comes to the digital transformation industry? And let's start with you, Eric. What are some roles that you've seen kind of emerge and you continue to see grow?
Well, two that come to mind off the bat are, one is architecture. Anyone that can, and I know I'm moving straight off the emotional soft skills straight into the technical stuff by saying architecture, but it is a hard skill that I think a lot of organizations need and could benefit from, especially with all the emerging technologies that are out there and the uses of multiple technologies throughout an organization. Someone that can understand architecture and how it all ties together, I think, is very important. And then the other piece that comes to mind is anything to do with data science, analytics, business intelligence. That's such an important thing right now from a technical skill set perspective. And then, there's other things like change management, program management that are just, they've always been really important. They will continue to be really important. So I do not want to be dismissive of those important skills either. But I think the two that come to mind as far as things that are changing and becoming more important, I'd say architecture and analytics and the whole data science piece of it.
Absolutely. And Khalid, being kind of an expert, our resident expert in data science and those maybe more hard technical skills, what are some things that you've seen maybe on the technical side and then the not so technical side as emerging roles in digital transformation?
Yeah, ironically, it feels like a lot of transformation work is moving a little more niche. There's broader, you think of it from an ERP perspective, like all of the functional areas that are being impacted by a transformational journey. But I'm seeing a lot of companies kind of go more narrow, kind of just the finance department itself is looking for a transformational support or expert. And you might look at specifically on like the logistics or supply chain side, but it seems like there's a demand that's sort of emerging for transformation within specific niches or within specific functional areas. And it's the same work. It kind of gets into a lot of those architectural spaces, but I think a lot of the energy there has to do with the edge systems, if you will, that are sort of emerging. So you'll have like a group like a finance or logistics group that knows they don't have the budget to reshape all of their needs there, but they know, look, we have enough to sort of just get this one application. Maybe it's budgeting, maybe it's not connected, or they'll figure out how to connect it to the rest of the system, but they need something very specific and they know it's going to require a certain amount of transformation on the team side, on the finance team side. So then they will look for those kind of skill sets, right? And it's impacting on the data side. So they might look for a technical resource or a transformation resource that can help them specifically, not for the company, but just on the finance side or just the logistics side. And so I think the technical skills are always going to be in demand from an IT or transformation perspective. They're always going to be in demand. But you still, I don't want those to cloud the broad need there, because you're still in the same vein of requiring communication and a lot of those soft skills that, I think sometimes on the technical side, they rely on, they get too reliant on having technical acumen. And I think it's great. It's like if you're a software engineer out there, a great software engineer is like a great lawyer. You don't need it, and you don't know you need that person until they're there. And it's like, well, you saved me. Like, there's no way we can get out of it. So there's no substitute for great technical acumen. But I think people that really have success in this space are able to, pull that into the soft skills that are still extremely necessary, because everyone isn't necessarily going to be dealing with the technical aspect. You have to be able to communicate what's needed there. You have to have soft skills that connect to some of those harder technical skills for, I think, to have success in transformation. And really, leadership style or upper echelon type of IT or development success as well.
We're here chatting with Kyler and Khalid from the Third Stage team, talking about careers and digital transformation in 2023 and beyond. We have a lot more to cover, but first we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we recently hosted our Digital Stratosphere 2022 virtual event. It's 3 days of packed content related to digital transformation best practices, about 16 or 18 different workshops and different speakers that are presenting on different topics, everything you need to know about transformation. The bad news is if you miss that event, the event's over. The live event already happened. But the good news, if you've missed it, or even if you did attend it and you want to see replays or you want to catch the sessions you missed, you can do that now by going to stratosphere2022.com. Go to stratosphere2022.com, register. All you have to do is put in your name and email address, just a few fields. You get immediate access to all the recordings. And the recordings cover everything from digital strategy, software selection, organizational change, process improvement, architecture, data migration, cloud, trends in the industry, how to avoid failure, some of the legal aspects to think about, contractual aspects to think about as it relates to your transformation. All that is stuff that you'll get by registering for Stratosphere 2022 Replay. And again, go to stratosphere2022.com and you can listen to all the replays of all the workshops that you might have missed at the event. So hope you check it out, and thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 95. I'm here with Khalid and Kyler talking about digital transformation careers in 2023 and beyond. Let's get back to it.
I want to jump into leadership a little bit as well, but I want to get back to our audience real quick. And Eric is driving, so he can help me pull up some of these comments. But just looking at where our global audience is joining us from, we have Newcastle, England. Jake over on YouTube, he's looking to be a cloud consultant, so great conversation to listen to. Ghassan from Kuwait, Mario, who's from Dallas, Daniel up in Grand Forks, North Dakota, who's probably frozen at this point. Chris from Oklahoma, Sam Graham from Spain, Ryan from Denver. So I want to go into actually a question from Daniel on LinkedIn that talked about what are the similarities, specifically Khalid, you see between coaching and your athletics background. And Khalid was a collegiate athlete and still a very, very renowned coach in our area. And digital transformation. And before I let you answer this question, we do have some moderators in the comments here, so they'll drop some additional supplementary content. Actually, Khalid and Eric did a full live stream on what is it like to coach through a digital transformation. So we'll link that here so you can see that discussion. But it's a definitely a very true and valuable connection between being a digital transformation coach and both of your sons I know are play basketball as well. So if you want to touch on kind of what that looks like from a coaching perspective.
I'm honestly, it's leadership. I mean, a good coach is a good leader, and obviously I deal more with kids, but it's easy to be a leader of kids, right? Because they don't know that much, and so they're just looking to you, and But in the workplace, you're dealing with men, you're dealing with women, and these are adults that are bringing a certain amount of, for lack of a better word, baggage, to the table, whether it's their own careers, their anxieties, concerns, like future plans, ambitions. They're bringing all of these things to the workplace every single day, and whether they work remotely or if it's an on-site. And so from a transformation perspective, you have to be a leader, and you have to bring leadership skills to the conversation. That's why technical is not enough. You have to be able to connect with people and help people through what it is that they're dealing with, so that everyone can be on the same page. That's the tough part about coaching. It's you have different skill levels. Some people are great, some people aren't. But just the same, we all have to be on the same page about how we're going to approach a situation or how we're going to have success. And that's the part that I think sometimes people miss, but that's where that similarity, really happens. This is a leadership conversation, and you have to bring those skills to the table to really move a group of adults to where they need to be.
Absolutely. And building on that, really great point, Eric, when you come in as a consultant and you're working with the leadership of an organization, how do you create that comfortability or that approachability with the leadership team to ensure you can create an impact in helping them to progress their project forward?
Well, I think a lot of it gets back to first of all, building credibility as an outside consultant, you have to have a certain amount of credibility. You have to be trusted. The client has to like you. The executive team has to just like you as a person, which is difficult because, not everyone's as likable as others. So that makes it a little bit more difficult. But I think some of the best ways to build that credibility and trust are to listen, back to the listening point, and really just understand what the needs are. I think, one of the big challenges in the digital transformation space that I see in the last, I don't know, 3 to 5 years maybe, is an emerging or a growing distrust of the digital transformation incumbents. So like the big software vendors, the big system integrators. There's always been some skepticism, but lately in the last few years, it feels like it's getting worse. And I think the reason for that is because, again, we as an industry are not listening. We're coming in with our prepackaged, pre-configured solutions. We're coming in with our cloud technologies that are silver bullets that solve all the world's problems. And we're sort of force fitting it into situations where it doesn't belong. And of course, the failure rate of digital transformations being so high as it's always been, I think that's contributing to the lack of trust in the market. So I think, if you're part of a digital transformation team, or especially if you're a consultant, building that credibility by listening, understanding, and just being open-minded too. I think that's another thing, is you can't just drink the Kool-Aid of SAP or Microsoft or Oracle or Deloitte or Accenture or whatever, insert big name here. They tend to have their sort of their right answers, if you will. And I think one of the keys to being an effective transformation team member and or consultant is to not come in with the answers predefined, but really just understand and diagnose and create a solution and help execute a solution that is aligned with strategic goals and objectives. Back to your point earlier, Kyler.
Yeah, absolutely. That's 100% what an effective consultant does. So I want to kind of go down the rise of those independents, or the success of overall third stage. If you are unaware, third stage did just receive a top 1/3 ranking on Inc. magazine's 5,000 fastest growing companies in the United States. So that's something that is a kind of a huge honor for us. It's our first year on the list as a company that's only 4 years old. And we've seen this emergence within the industry of clients and our community reaching out for that independent and that agnostic advice. And Khalid, is someone who's worked on kind of both sides of being an independent consultant, and then also, being a system integrator and being on that side of the business. Why do you think that shift is happening specifically in the industry? And has such volume and momentum behind it?
It's interesting. That's an interesting question. I think it's probably twofold. First, I think the model for a lot of those system integrators is to attack problems with people. And so the teams are huge where they historically have been. And that's part of the price tag, of kind of throwing 50 people at a problem. I've been on implementation projects with really large footprints, and internally the conversation was about coverage. Let's make sure the client knows we're there, and you're there with the people that are there, and you're like, they really don't need to be there, right? Like, because half of them are learning, are trying to figure it out. Other half of them are working. Like it's sort of this mix of too many people trying to deal with a complicated problem. I think that with a lot of the independent groups, they've been able to target specific problems a little bit more strategically, right? Where you kind of have kind of this smaller, smart team that's dealing with a core aspect of the problem, and they sound, they make more sense, so to speak, for a lot of organizations versus trying to just throw a bunch of money or a bunch of resources at it, but rather just attacking it with a small, smart plan that's acute in nature, but is highly, highly effective, right? Or even having a methodology behind that sort of time, that's sort of proven, as opposed to, again, just resourcing a problem. So I guess there's different, aspects to it, but based from the experiences that I've had, I would say that I think a lot of those independent groups are a little more strategic.
That's a really interesting answer. And with that strategy, Eric, it seems like you've seen the need for that in the industry and have a quite remarkable story on how you've created not only content and conversation around that in the public and social media space, but also how you've created kind of carved out that niche for specific consultancy and client work. Can you talk a little bit about how you saw that need or how your instincts kind of told you that that was going to be something that was a real value in the marketplace, that independent and agnostic lens to digital transformation?
Yeah, it actually started really early in my career when I was working at one of the aforementioned big system integrators. That's where I started my career, was at Price Waterhouse, doing change management consulting primarily. Although I also did software selection and process reengineering and some other stuff. But I was jaded. On one hand, I really liked consulting from the start, but I also really didn't like it because of the bias that we had, and I was part of that. And I actually remember early on when I would go to work, when I'd go to the client or when I was traveling to a client, a lot of times I would put on that song, Welcome to the Machine by Pink Floyd. And if you know that song, if anyone that knows that song, it's about just being part of the machine and a cog in the machine and being taken advantage of and all that kind of theme. And it might be a bit extreme, but that's sort of how I felt being in the industry at the time, is I felt like I was part of this machine and I felt kind of dirty, like I just didn't feel like I was doing the right thing. And that's what it was expected of me, was not to do the right thing, in my opinion. And so, and actually, Sam Graham had a question that I think maybe helps point this out, or maybe build on your question a little bit more. But he asked the question: is a consultant with only one tool actually just a salesperson? And how much do consultancies and sales overlap? And that's a brilliant question, because I've never really thought of it in that context. But that, in my opinion, that question strikes at the heart of what's wrong with our industry and what's wrong with digital transformations in general. Is that when you're not independent, you're affiliated with some software solution, some software vendor. And your job is to promote that product and to figure out how to expand the footprint of that product, how to implement it to as many people as you can within an organization. The implementing company typically gets commission on how much software they're selling. So there's just a ton of monetary incentive to push one product. And so, to Sam's point, consultants oftentimes are just glorified salespeople. They're out there to promote a product and to push that product out to people. And sometimes it's the right fit, sometimes it's not. Too often it's not the right fit, and it ends up being sort of forcing a square peg into a round hole. Not to say that people listening should really second guess the technology they're deploying, but you should really be selective about where you deploy technology instead of just deploying one size fits all answer. So I think that independent model, in my opinion, is really important, because back to the trust thing, it's hard to trust someone is getting paid to promote one product over another or one technology, regardless of whether or not it's the right fit for you. And so that independence, I think, one thing I've noticed in our thought leadership and just YouTube videos, podcasts, all that stuff, is people trust us. I mean, they trust us because we're not trying to sell anything. We're pretty transparent that we make money from our clients. Clients pay us to do stuff, and that's where we make our money. That's the only place that we make money from. We don't make money from software vendors. We don't get commission. So our sole focus is on our clients, which may sound like a no-brainer, but it's not a no-brainer, because the subtle difference with other consulting firms is, yes, they're making money from their clients, but they're also making a lot of money from software vendors for promoting certain products. So I think that's, that independence, I thought, even back when I was part of the machine, listening to Pink Floyd, Welcome to the Machine.
Welcome to the Machine.
Listen to the song. It's a really good song if you don't know it. It's a little dark, but it's super intense. I like it a lot. I still listen to it, even though I'm not part of the machine. Although we sort of are, but anyway.
We sort of are, but I want to piggyback on. I think that's an interesting perspective. It's a great question, and I'm gonna speak from the dark side here on that a little bit. I think the first thing you have to understand with that kind of question or issue is the software development lifecycle. You design before you build. You don't build before you design. And if you talk to those one tool guys before you actually design, they're going to be talking about their expertise. There was a comment earlier about the cloud and saying that there was an individual that wanted to be a cloud consultant. Which one? Are you going to be Azure? Or are you going to go that route? You almost have to pick your tool and sharpen it. And I love the idea of not picking tools and just learning everything that I possibly can. But you're going to be limited because you can't know it all. And so, you then have to look at that and say, am I going to go with Amazon? Am I going to go Azure? Am I going to be an expert at one or the other? Am I going to go Google Cloud? And there's some others that are emerging. I think even Apple is trying. But where am I going to put my flag in the sand there? And then you become that one tool, right? But the problem with it is, from an architecture perspective, we had a lot of talks about architecture. You need to do that work first. You need to understand what you're trying to accomplish first, and that has to be independent. That has to not really be corroded with experts that only know one thing, and then they kind of say, well, if you chose this software, you're not ready for that conversation yet, right? You're still in a space where you're trying to figure out what makes the most sense for my organization. What am I trying to accomplish? Almost like if I'm trying to build a custom application, I just want to kind of go through the design of what skills I need before I go to the marketplace, and then say, okay, I need somebody that can do this language or that language, or has expertise in this thing or that. Right. I kind of need to plan that out first. So the independence is huge in the front end. I think it's a requirement on the front end. Right. And then after then you can kind of go about choosing the right one skill guy. And yeah, they'll sell themselves into it, and you're listening to it, but you're listening to it from the perspective of, I know I need this skill. I know I want that skill. And you've already made that determination from an independent design that you've structured.
Yeah, and that's why we always like to have, those perspectives from understanding our vendor partners as well. Include, you always kind of provide that dichotomy to Eric's disruptor over here, Pink Floyd against the machine. So I think that's the important part of it. And I'm glad that you brought this one up. Fernando actually, not to call him out, but he reached out to me on LinkedIn actually last night. And we had a conversation about how, as a younger person in your career and getting to these bigger four or agencies can be challenging, because they throw a ton of money at you and offer a real stable type of work environment. So I wonder what you guys would say to someone that might be fresh out of college, just right out of kind of the graduate area, going into the workforce, that's interested in digital transformation, but doesn't quite know how to do what you're saying, Khalid, to kind of pick a tool, pick a skill set. They just don't have the background or the experience. What are some things that they could do? And I'll just give Fernando complete props right here. He's reaching out to people in the industry. He's joining live streams. He's understanding what that looks like as far as his career. And I think that's so important to kind of join that conversation. But with you two, I kind of want to get your perspective. So let's start with you, Eric. I know you work with a lot of young people, and our moderators can pop actually some of our college student content in the chat here, so you can kind of see how Eric works with that kind of younger workforce. But understanding what that looks like, I think is so important, especially for our emerging workforce in the independence area.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one thing I think I always encourage college kids or recent college graduates to think about is to think about what your strengths are. You may not have a ton of experience, but let's think about what your strengths are and what transferable strengths you have. One of the biggest things, at least when we're hiring at third stage, one of the big advantages that a recent college graduate has is they haven't been jaded by the machine. They haven't been, biased by the machine. They haven't been part of it yet. And so you don't have those sort of bad habits or myopic views of the world that you have to try and change, which is really difficult with a really experienced consultant. So I think you have to look at, well, that's a plus, right? You've got a fresh set of eyes, a fresh perspective as a younger, newer person to consulting. And then also, look to, what you studied in school or what extracurricular activities you're involved with or internships that you've been involved with that might provide some skills that are transferable. So things that demonstrates that you are a good communicator, a good listener. I always look for people too. Two things that catch my eye on a resume that sound like they have nothing to do with consulting, but I think they do, is someone who was involved in athletics and or coaching. So that's part of, what I think makes Khalid such a good consultant is he was a competitive collegiate athlete, and now he's a coach, and he just has a different mentality about teamwork and communication and things of that nature. But the other thing on top of that is people that have worked in semi-intense customer service situations, like people that have waited tables or, been a server at a restaurant or, customer service reps, people that have been under fire, presumably from angry customers and
Mhm.
have to have a relatively high emotional EQ to be able to deal with that. Those are skills that are really hard to teach. I can't, for example, me, myself as a leader, I don't know how to teach someone to listen more and to deal with angry customers and that sort of thing unless you've been through it. And so, you may think that has nothing to do with it, but if you've been a server at a restaurant or whatever, talk about how that applies to consulting. And then, of course, if you can get an internship that has some sort of relevance to consulting or digital transformation in general, whether it's a technical role or a process improvement role, maybe you're part of a change team or whatever the case may be. That, for example, is how I really got my foot in the door in consulting. Is I really just stumbled across an internship at my school when I was getting my master's degree, my MBA. It was a CIO at a local company, a manufacturing company. They were implementing Oracle, and they wanted an intern to come in and help redesign business processes. And I didn't care about the technology piece or ERP at that time. All I cared about was that I really liked supply chain and operations, and that was my focus. And so I dove into that. But then I learned to enjoy technology, and I realized how important that process improvement background that I developed in that year-long internship, that's what got me in the door at PwC and led me to Be Angry listening to Pink Floyd, Welcome to the Machine. So, and eventually to Third Stage to get to where we are today.
I really like the customer service experience piece there, and it seems like it may sound like left field for some in the audience, but you have to understand that the first most basic skill that you'll need in consultancy to have any kind of success is the trust advisor relationship. Once that is broken, you walk on a job, you either have all the credibility in the world for whatever reason, they might have talked you up or whatever, or you have zero credibility, right? You walk in and everyone's looking at you sideways, like, who is this individual? Do they know anything? Right. So from there, whether you're starting with 100 or you're starting at 0, you have to build credibility. And part of how you go about the process of building that credibility are some of those same skills that are demonstrated with someone on the server side. It's the little things. It's did you bring my drink back? You said you were going to bring my drink back, and they didn't walk off. And it just makes you it puts you in a whole nother mode. Like all of a sudden it's like, I don't have a drink. Like, what are you doing? Did you get my order right? Like who are you? It just breaks everything else down just because they said, oh, I'll be right back with the drink. And an hour later they didn't. So it's that little break right there that just disrupted the entire experience. And that's what happens on the field in consulting. You have to constantly build up those small wins, those little things that sort of, put the client at ease, like, saying they're a part of what they say they're going to do, they do well. It turns into this sort of just conversation. You become a part of their staff, an extension of their staff, and then they start to trust you. And that's where the consulting really happens and begins and runs. So it's for me, it's very important to be able to manage relationships, to build on relationships when you're kind of going into these engagements. And the way you can start, you can start with whatever skill you have. If you're finance, I started my consulting career really started because I had a financial background. I knew accounting, and so I started working there. But it doesn't really matter what you start with. You can bring into that space, anything across, because there's always going to be a need for a consultant to do various aspects. So you can bring what you already have and know, but no matter what, you have to manage relationships and you have to build credible relationships. I've been on jobs where it has fallen apart. I've been on jobs where I've been able to maintain it well. And that's the biggest takeaway for me is just making sure that that's always in place.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times, to your point, Khalid, people overcomplicate the relationship side of it. It's really just being someone that can be trustworthy, that is authentic, that's able to sit in that room and have that conversation. It really doesn't matter if you have 50 years of experience or 5. Just being able to have that trust in that client relationship is so important. And just real quick, I see many of you kind of self-promoting in the comments here, which I absolutely love, which is great. So we are hiring actively at Third Stage. We do it a little different as we match skill sets with our culture and our clients, as opposed to kind of just numbers and resumes. If you are interested at working at Third Stage or joining our team, or having that conversation about who we are, you can email work@thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our careers page on our website and input a form that way too. So please include your resume and a little bit about your understanding of kind of the third stage approach. Helps us see if you're a good match. So thank you for your engagement and passion about joining this team, as well, that we're all obviously super passionate about. So I want to kind of shift gears, still on the same lines of going into digital transformation careers. But what if you're a seasoned professional? For example, I had a teacher reach out to me the other day on LinkedIn, talking about how they wanted to transition from teaching into organizational change management and business communications, again along those coaching lines. What advice would you give to someone who's making that shift into their career, who might already have a background in other things? And Khalid, let's start with you this time.
Oh, it's, I mean, sometimes you have to sell it. I do think that there is a lot of sales that happens in the consulting space, and sometimes you have to sell your skill. But something like teaching is insanely valuable. One of my friends, got into consulting that way. Just was a master's in education, just a teacher's teacher, and they were able to build curriculums for these kind of software applications, and kind of build these books that they were able to kind of pass on to clients, and sort of really sort of build out this learning curve. And they were flying all over the place, and it was this full curriculum that they were able to do. Who's going to do a curriculum better than a teacher? Right. I mean, they know it like the back of their hand. Like, how do they sort of educate someone who doesn't know kind of where they're going with that particular curriculum? Every software company needs that particular skill. So it's something, as consulting is everything. So long as you're an expert at something, right, there's going to be a tie for that, I think, in the business world. It's just a matter of where. And you may not necessarily know where, but certainly something like teaching in the organizational change space is ginormous. And I think they need more, to be honest, because the people that are doing this curriculum work right now aren't teachers. The people that are doing the education side or the training aspects, and it's one thing that we are sensitive to in the field, is kind of really having those conversations about what is your training plan need to look like, making sure that it's adequate, because you really want to make sure that the staff is not just comfortable with the software that is being implemented, but that they are well trained and that they feel empowered by it, right? And that really happens, I think, with a solid training plan, solid curriculums, and the likes. And I'm telling you, I don't see a lot of them often, certainly from a lot of the software companies that are sort of rolling their softwares out.
Absolutely. And that knowledge transfer and overall user adoption is one of the ways that we often see a lack of benefits realization and business value, right, around software. You could buy the coolest, shiniest, most beautiful software in the world, but if your organization doesn't know how to use it or leverage it or is scared of it, then you're not going to actually feel that ROI, which is ultimately, the goal of new technology. So very, very good point. What about you, Eric? What advice would you give to someone who might be in a midst of a different career that wants to shift over to consulting?
Well, I think you have an advantage in that you have some experience, and some of that experience is highly likely to be relevant to consulting. So if you think about someone who, for example, is an internal supply chain or procurement clerk, or whatever, they worked in supply chain or procurement or some other business function, I'd really highlight that and say, supply chain really well, or, finance and accounting really well, whatever the area is, because the reality of the industry, despite the works that I've sort of railed on here, are really hammered today in today's conversation. The reality is that's how the industry is built. It's built on specialization, and it's built on deep knowledge, either in a functional area and or a specific technology. So if you have deep experience in a functional area, highlight that, because that's going to be a strength, and that's going to catch someone's eye in the industry. The other thing is the technology too. Even if you're just a user of a leading ERP system, that's big. And I would put that on your resume and highlight that, because there's, if you use Microsoft Dynamics, for example, or SAP S/4HANA, whatever the system is, if you're a user of that and you know the system fairly well, better than, the average new consultant straight out of college, then you would want to highlight that and say you understand, the order to cash process within SAP or whatever. So really highlighting those and bumping those things to the top of your resume, sort of like key skills and competencies that you have. And again, it goes back to what I'd say to recent college graduates too, is instead of worrying so much about what you don't have, it's a matter of really looking at, it may be limited. It may not be as deep as someone who's been in consulting for 20 or 30 years, but you probably have some unique experiences that are different from a lifelong consultant like myself. I don't understand what it's like to be an internal IT team member. I just don't have that perspective because I've never done it. But if you have, highlight that and really showcase that, because I think that's going to be a big differentiator potentially in the marketplace. So that's another type of person we like to hire, someone who has some experience, maybe never done consulting, but they've got these transferable relevant skills as well. And so I think it's a matter of just identifying what those are and really highlighting that in your CV or your resume.
Absolutely. And even, technology natives, early adopters, what platforms have you used? I mean, we can't all be TikTok famous like Eric is, but, we can still have, that knowledge of platforms, and I'll speak to all of those kind of non-technical people in the digital transformation space. There is space for creatives and communicators within that too. I recently wrote a blog. I'll shout out to the moms, right? I have a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old, but how moms make the best project managers because they have a lot of adversity that they need to kind of overcome. So there is room for that experience that might not be kind of exactly in those categories that you see as the quote unquote traditional digital transformation consultant. The industry is changing. It's really exciting.
We're here chatting with Kyler and Khalid from the Third Stage team, talking about careers in digital transformation in 2023 and beyond. We have a lot more to cover, but first we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
Give me the sense to wonder. If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 95. I'm here with Khalid and Kyler talking about digital transformation careers in 2023 and beyond. Let's get back to it.
I want to go back to our audience and bring up a question here from Malcolm, kind of a comment and a question. And he kind of talked about, from my consultancy experience, the worst experience is when a client has been sold the wrong software or module. One consultancy manager I had worked with had a good solution to this. If sales had sold something and the consultancy could not deliver, they asked sales to come back and demonstrate how to get it to work or not on site. So just kind of evolving this question a little bit, this is a key competency to a good consultant, is selecting a solution, listening to the client about their needs and requirements. Building on this, what are some other key competencies or skill sets that a consultant needs to have when advising on a new software or a technical tool? Because I think this is a really important aspect of that, and staying true to the overall client's goals and objective as a business. So Eric, let's kind of start with you on this one to see if you can kind of take us through what that looks like from a real life example perspective.
Yeah, so I think the key here is, if you have, first of all, if you have that objective view and you're not coming in with, again, the right answer up front, that's going to give you an open mind and you're going to be more open to alternatives to just a one size fits all, technology solution. The other thing that I think this question gets to is the fact that, most of the time during evaluation processes, you have a sales rep who is clearly incentivized to sell the software. So their leading answer to most questions is going to be yes. Can your software do A, B, or C? Their conditioned to say, yes, it can. It may not do it well, but it can do it, right? And that's the gray area that often gets missed is, most ERP systems or technologies that are designed for a certain type of function can meet, most clients' business requirements to some degree, but there's a gray area there of, well, it can do it, but how well can it do it? And so having, first of all, a broad knowledge of different technologies in the space, as well as having tool sets that provide some objective data. And one of the problems with the industry, again, I don't want to beat up our own industry too much. I've done plenty of that here so far today, but I'll do it again because it's important. But if you look at even like Gartner and Forrester, you look at Gartner in particular, they're a huge industry analyst firm. A lot of CIOs and internal organizations rely on Gartner's magic quadrants and analysis of the industry, which is fine. That's a data point, but you have to understand software vendors commission those studies. And so you're getting a false sense of third-party validation of how awesome a certain technology is when the software vendor just paid Gartner to put out that magic quadrant where they're in the top right corner and they're awesome. They're the best things in sliced bread. And so, but then you think, well, what other options do I have? I've got Gartner. I've got the software sales rep. Who else am I going to turn to? And that's where you look to, independents or independent resources like Third Stage. But more specifically, we have a database that we use that tracks specific business requirements, about 30,000 different business requirements against several hundred different enterprise technologies. And it doesn't just track whether or not software can do something, it tracks how well software can do it. And that's really a key thing, because in this question here from Malcolm, it sounds like sales sold a bill of goods. It said, yes, our software can do this, and they convinced them of it, but then the delivery team comes in and says, we don't even know, we don't know how to make it do what the client wants it to do. And that could have been a breakdown in that lack of independence or that lack of objective assessment of that technology and its ability to fit those needs. So I think that it goes back to the objective and technology unbiased view of the world that's so important.
Absolutely. And Khalid, this is what you do on a daily basis, right? So this is kind of, what you manage and lead here at Third Stage. So very curious to hear kind of your opinion and thoughts.
I think, it's dirty business. I get that. That happens all the time. I mean, I can't explain how many. I've had a lot of Big Four experience over the course of my career, and so I've done a lot of implementations on that stage. And I don't know if I remember one where I felt like this is a great application for what it is that they're doing. I think in all instances, it was just, what in the world? Who decided to do this? Like, and in the field, it was constantly, because consulting, this is all about solving problems. I mean, they're trying on the sales side, they're trying to solve problems. On the delivery side, they're trying to solve problems. And the problems that we're trying to solve on the delivery side, when you have this application that really isn't a good fit for the problems that an organization may be dealing with, or the requirements, is you start doing these gymnastics of, how am I going to make this work? How am I going to adjust this thing? How are we? And it becomes these small kind of rooms where everyone's kind of sitting around, like, how are we going to do this? They're designing up different constructs to sort of beat up the software to do things that it essentially cannot do. I think it all goes back to, in the very, very beginning, you kind of need a level of independence, a level of a vision for how this whole thing is going to work. Then you fit the parts into that vision. And when you don't do that, I think you open the door to kind of being on the other side, right? Where you have a reactive delivery cycle. And I think that's where the negative is. That's where you see all the problems with the machine, if you will. Where you have a bunch of delivery consultants trying to react to problems that really they shouldn't be reacting to, right? Or something worse, right? Where you have implementations that fail, or they just are poor fits, and kind of turns into this legal issue. We do a lot of expert witness and just kind of reading through the cases and situations that we're coming across. It's just problem after problem. A lot of the times you're thinking, why did they decide to go in this direction in the first place? Was a great salesman. So you can't get caught up in the sales. I think you need to get more so visionary with what it is your business needs, what direction that your business is going, and start to paint the picture before your technical resources even step through the door. And that way you have a clear perspective around who should be coming through the door, what it is that you'll need, what they'll be doing, where they need to connect with other aspects of your organization to really fit it the way you need it to be. And it starts to be, I think, an architecture that really supports your business model, right? Versus you trying to take your business model and fit it to a architecture that doesn't really, that's more standard and doesn't really support what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, that core ability to be aligned and have a plan around your business goals. What are you trying to achieve with this new tool or software is so key. And as Khalid mentioned, we do a ton of expert witness work, and hopefully a digital transformation project will never get to that point where it's involving litigation. But Eric and some of our other expert witnesses do testify, because that's how bad it can get when you don't select a tool, or you don't have, more importantly, that cohesive approach between all of the different parties working on your digital transformation, and that dedication to that strategic alignment. And most importantly, the quality assurance around that. And that's a lot what we do here at Third Stage, is come in as kind of that PMO type of resource that continues to keep the project on track and all of the different agendas in check. So that's something that we've seen as emerging work, especially in the last couple years since starting Third Stage, a true need in the industry. So I want to ask a question from Sam Graham here, because I think this is a very interesting question. He talks about, is there an advantage to working first with that small outfit or more boutique agency like Third Stage, or should you go into more targeted jobs? And I think this is an interesting question, because both of you bring learnings from that bigger agency background, and really had that awareness and understanding about what you wanted out of your career, or what you wanted to provide as value to your clients. So what would be your overall recommendation? And before I turn it over to you, Khalid, I'm just going to say Sam Graham is a top thought leader in the ERP and digital transformation space. We're all huge fans of him. If you are interested, I highly recommend connecting with him and asking him questions in this space too. One of these days, we're shameless plug here, we're going to get him on.
We're starting it. We're going to start a social media campaign to pressure Sam Graham to be on this live stream. We're going to make it happen somehow, Sam.
Get on the pod stream, Sam. I think it's a great question, though, and for me, there is no answer to it. To be frank, I'll tell you my experience, which was actually coming through a small outfit. Eric actually brought me into the consulting space. I then sort of branched off and went into other companies, Big Four groups, et cetera, et cetera. And now I'm back working with Eric now, 20 years, 15 years later, not to date ourselves. But I say that because my experience, and obviously you guys have a sense of what Eric's perspective is. He's had the same perspective and really pioneered independence in this space. And he has contaminated my mind with that. So because I worked with Eric early, because I worked with Eric in that small outfit, when I started to branch off and kind of go into the machine, if you will, I never wanted to be connected to one application. I always wanted to learn other models that are out there. I brought in that sort of small independent perspective into kind of these more structured patterns that sort of exist in consulting. And for me, it was extremely healthy. So for me, I'd probably lean on the side of kind of, it's okay to kind of work with an outfit and kind of get some particulars, whether it's methodology or whether it's kind of that kind of perspective, and then bring it into the bigger consultant world, right? But because the dangers of living in that big consultant world first is, unless you're, a raging independent like Eric is, you start to sort of get real narrow into the this is the best way to go about it, right? Whether it's one tool mentality, because that's kind of what happens when you go into the bigger outfits, is you get into that specialization that the field naturally pushes you into, and it can work against you later. Think about the perspective of you've spent 15 years on a particular application, and then all of a sudden that application has been discontinued. where's your career go from there, right? So being a specialist is good, but it's important that you think beyond just one particular tool. And when you work with those big outfits, that's kind of where they push you. So
the other thing too is just the breadth of background you get versus the structure and the focus. So, you know, if you go to a big consulting firm, the advantages are that you're in a highly structured environment. It's set up to where you can't fail. Even if you try, you can't really fail or harm a client, or not, I shouldn't say harm a client, but you can't really fail as a consultant on a team because there's so many safeguards in place to ensure that doesn't happen, which can be good if you're starting out. You've got a safety net, you've got a lot of support, a lot of structure, but you're sort of pigeonholed, you know, early on. You're sort of put into a little box, and you need to stay in that box. And that's part of how they ensure that you don't fail, is because you're in your box. You're not getting ahead of your skis or anything like that. The advantage of working at a smaller firm, or it could be a disadvantage depending on your personality and what you're trying to do. But the advantage, in my opinion, is that a smaller firm is going to have less structure. It's more entrepreneurial, and you get a broader view of consulting. You're not forced into a box, but that can be stressful for some people because they want to be in a box. They want to ease into it. They want the structure. They want the really solid support system. And I don't want to suggest companies like us at Third Stage, we're not supportive. We are supportive, but we just don't have the structure and the, you know, some of that infrastructure that can provide some of that perceived safety. So I think a lot of it comes down to what you want. I mean, and back into what Khalid was saying too, and using his background and my background as an example, you don't have to pick one and stick with it forever. I mean, you might decide, oh, okay, I'll start off at a big firm and then go to a small firm, or vice versa. You know, do what Khalid did. You could start off at a independent or a smaller firm and then go work for one of the bigger guys. It just really depends on what you do. There's a lot of turnover at the big consulting firms. Most people don't last more than 2 years, which is about what I lasted. And I can say with 100% certainty, if I wasn't doing technology agnostic consulting now, I would not be a consultant right now. I don't know what I'd be doing, but it wouldn't be consulting. So, you know, it's just a matter of what it is you like and what's important to you, you know, in your career.
You'd be a Pink Floyd groupie, definitely.
Totally.
For sure.
Or a DJ, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe
but
an Uber driver. I don't know. There's so many options.
Yeah. Just to round that out with just basic career advice, it sounds like that awareness in what works for you and that understanding of what you want professionally and what your values and integrity are in dedication to the organization. And then also that gratitude for what you learned from organizations that might not have matched that, but you were able to harvest a lot of really core skills out of that to build on your career.
Yeah. One thing I would add to really quickly, Kyler, just in the interest of time, I know we're trying to wrap up here, but one thing I want to add to what you just said, in building on another point you made that was really important, but I feel like it's worth highlighting, is you talked about being a mom and how you've learned so much about project management in that case. And we've talked about Khalid and how he's learned about, you know, how coaching is applied to his consulting background. But I think that's the other thing is, you know, it's a sensitive thing to talk about because in the United States and some other countries, it's highly sensitive and sometimes illegal to ask questions about your life situation. But there's things in your life situation that probably could make you a good, you know, digital transformation team member, whether it's coaching, being a mom, if you have a blue collar background and you just are used to hard work, or a military background. That's another thing that we notice, a correlation between work ethic and willingness to roll up their sleeves and get the job done. So if you look at things like that too, and really build on those and be, you use the word gratitude. I'd be proud of it. I'd go a step further and say you should be proud of that and highlight those things and say, I was in the military. Here's what I learned about things that are relevant to digital transformation. I may have never done it, but I have done things that a lot of people haven't done. So whether it's military or being a parent or a coach or whatever, I mean, look to your unique background and try and leverage that and highlight those strengths. I think that's really important. All right. Thank you, Khalid. Thank you, Kyler. Great conversation. A lot of good lessons there. A lot of stuff we didn't cover. We could have spent hours talking about that, but that's a good start to providing some guidance and advice on how to start your digital transformation career, or how to pivot your transformation career in 2023 and beyond. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Kyler and I will debrief on some of the key points in that conversation. And later in the show, too, we'll have our case study on food and beverage in digital transformation. So be sure to stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, we'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 95. You can find new episodes of our show every Wednesday on audio podcast platforms throughout the world, as well as LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So be sure to check us out there and subscribe to the show. And so, Kyler, we just had you, Khalid, and I were talking about transformation careers. What are some of your takeaways or lessons from that conversation?
Well, I mean, I think it's like we said, there really is opportunity for a variety of skill sets, and I think that's a common misconception when it comes to specifically IT consulting, is that you really do need hard technical skills. And I really just feel like it's a beautiful evolution to kind of bring in those communicators, those business analysts, those, different types of focuses into the digital transformation space, because there is a need there for being able to do that. So whether you're coming out of college and you're super green, or if you've been in a different career and you bring a different perspective to the table, the industry is really diversified in the fact that there are needs in many different areas that people can bring to the table. And I think that that's just such a positive movement, because it gives more value to our clients in the fact that we are able to bring a more diverse perspective to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also a reminder that, even though I'm a bit biased and I think the technology independent agnostic model is superior to other models, I mean, the good news is, even if whether you agree or disagree with that statement, there's lots of opportunities in the digital transformation space. I mean, you could be, an internal IT person, you could be part of a transformation team internally, you could be a consultant that helps clients through their digital transformations. You could specialize in the technical aspects of one specific software. You could be more of a functional generalist. I mean, there's just so many different avenues you can pursue. That's part of what makes this field interesting and fun, but also overwhelming at times too.
Yeah, and I love the piece about customer service that you kind of mentioned, whether you've worked in retail, food and beverage, the service industry, the military, and in those types of situations where you may have a high stress or a situation in which you kind of need to monitor and maintain a client relationship or a customer relationship. Those baseline skills can go really far when it comes to consulting, especially, if you establish them at a young age and being able to grow them and understand what that means in a professional environment. I love how you kind of peppered that in there to just remind people that brings a lot of value too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've hired some more junior people in particular over the last, 15 years or so, that didn't have a ton of experience on paper as far as, direct experience in consulting or IT or whatever, but they had a pretty deep or extensive background working through college in the service industry. That, there's a lot of value there. And I think you're right that a lot of times, especially when you're in college and you're being told, all the skills you need to develop, and you've got this big wide open field like digital transformation, it could get overwhelming. But if you can really focus on what those things are that are transferable, I find that more often than not, a lot of resumes that I look at, especially once I get to know the person behind the resume, they understate some of those skills. And not all organizations are going to value service industry, for example, or military the same way we do. But I think even if they don't necessarily, you can sell it as something that in your resume, your cover letter, your outreach to people, you can sell it as, explain to them why it is relevant, even if that's not something they're looking for. So I think that's a way to take charge of your career growth and development for sure.
And I know you've mentioned in some of our content that certifications can kind of be tough. Some are really good, some are bad, or I shouldn't say bad, but some can cause bad habits like biases or something like that, or kind of pigeonhole you into one specific tool set. If you were out in the marketplace today as more of wanting to establish yourself in the digital transformation space, what are some certifications, some additional education training courses that you would undergo or that you've seen to be really successful?
You mean in addition to the awesome content that Third Stage uh, puts out on a daily basis?
Well, obviously, I
Um,
was trying to lay that up for you. I mean, I am the
right.
marketing director, so that was what I was going for. But obviously, our content, we put out a ton for free. You put out a ton for free in the fact that you just want to bring that message to the overall industry. But if I am fresh out of school, would you go get a Microsoft Dynamics certification? Would you go get a third-party supply chain certification? Or how would you kind of navigate that? And how valuable are those on a resume?
Well, I think it definitely doesn't hurt. So if your goal is to be a change management consultant and you go get ProSci certified, that can be a nice addition to a bachelor's degree or whatever your educational background is. And then if you can layer on top of that some sort of internship where you get some direct experience, even if you're doing it for cheap or for free, you're not getting paid much to do it potentially, that can pay dividends later by doing that. Um, I don't know. It's hard for me to answer whether or not I'd go get certified in one system because that is what I did. Back in the day, I got certified in SAP, and that's just not because I wanted to necessarily. In fact, I did not want to. But PwC made me, for lack of a better word. They forced me to get certified because it was such a big part and still is a big
Hmm.
part of what PwC does. So I don't know. I have mixed feelings on it. I didn't like it at the time. I didn't want to get pigeonholed as an SAP guy, and I've successfully dodged that bullet but I had to start a company that was agnostic to dodge that bullet. Um, but I think on the other hand, having that hands-on experience and really understanding how a specific ERP system works and really understanding the nuts and bolts, that has come, that's been extremely valuable in my career. So I feel like I can just speak to how ERP systems work, even though I'm not certified. It's not an active certification now. Technology's changed quite a bit, and I'm not doing configuration like I used to or I did at one point. So it does give a good foundation for sure. And if you're a technical person and that's what you want to do, by all means, go get certified or go learn a certain system. There's a lot of excuse me. There's a lot of systems out there that have a bright future. SAP is one of them. Microsoft Dynamics, Oracle, Cloud, Oracle NetSuite, a lot of different ones. So I think just maybe carefully choosing which one you focus on. I think that could be an important decision too. And then, of course, supply chain. I think supply chain process improvement, that's an important skill set. So if you can go get certified in Apex or, one of those supply chain based organizations, that could be helpful. So anything you can do to round out your resume is really important. And today's day and age, with all the free content floating around and relatively cheap training courses that are online, I mean, it's easier than ever to get some sort of experience or exposure that you might not have otherwise gotten in college or elsewhere.
Yeah, one thing I didn't mention in the hot topics is actually here in the U.S. Northwestern University has waived all standardized testing fee for any technology worker that has recently been laid off. We've kind of seen a large amount of layoffs in the technical field, especially for bigger tech companies. But I think that's something to just always consider is what you can do to educate yourself. That doesn't have to be a formal education. It doesn't have to be higher education. It doesn't have to break the bank. But the fact is, you can be a constant learner and continue to understand kind of what lights you up and what you're passionate about. So that way you can bring that passion into serving clients or serving an organization.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. For certain. I think that's a great point. Well, that's good stuff. And one thing we mentioned, or you mentioned in the discussion, that if you are interested in a career at Third Stage in particular, you can email us at work@thirdstage, THIRD stage-consulting.com. And that email goes to our chief operating officer and our recruiting team. And certainly, you can reach out to Kyler and I on LinkedIn if you're looking for advice or you want to, if you get our attention effectively, we could potentially float your interest to the top of the to the top of the queue, especially if you're in geographically, if you're in one of the regions where we have offices. So if you're in North America, if you're in Australia, Hong Kong, South Africa, certainly Europe, Western Europe, particularly the UK. If you're in any of those regions, that's sort of where we've got a footprint, a physical presence. So if you're in one of those regions, that tends to get our attention more so than some of the ones where we're not yet. But yeah, so feel free to forward on your resume and reach out to us on LinkedIn if you want to connect and learn more about the company. So we'll take a quick break, and we're going to get to our third segment here in just a moment. We're going to play a clip, an interview that you had, Kyler, that's a pretty deep dive into food and beverage. It's a food and beverage case study with one of our clients based out of APAC. We're going to have Wayne Holtham on the show, or in the clip that we play for you, Wayne Holtham, who's been on the show before, but he's the head of our third stage APAC office. He's based out of Australia, and he covers the entire Asia Pacific area of our client base, and he's going to talk about a food and beverage case study for one of our clients. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll return with more Transformation Ground Control.
Are you looking to stay ahead of the curve in the ever-changing landscape of digital transformation? Then you need our newly released 2023 Digital Transformation Report. This comprehensive report covers the latest trends, technologies, and strategies to ensure your digital transformation is optimized for success. The 2023 Digital Transformation Report is packed full of proven methodologies and insights from experts in the independent digital transformation field. You'll also receive practical insights on how to implement digital transformation strategies within your unique organization. This free report is available for download on our website at thirdstage-consulting.com under our Thought Leadership section.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 95. New episodes every Wednesday on audio podcast platforms, as well as LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Be sure to check us out. And for this last segment, we thought we'd play you a clip of a deep dive case study into food and beverage. It's with one of our clients, or it's regarding one of our clients who will remain nameless in the conversation, but we'll play you this clip to talk about the food and beverage industry and a digital transformation we're helping them through at the moment. So with that, let's go ahead and roll the clip of Kyler, you talking to Wayne Holtham out of our third stage APAC office about food and beverage case study.
I'll turn it over to you, Wayne, to kind of just give us a little bit of an introduction about your background and your experience within digital transformation, specifically in the food and beverage arena.
Thanks, Kyler. It's good to be here, and nice that we can talk about food and beverage. My background, I've probably spent the last 20 odd years in different stages of food and beverage, in the sense that worked as a production manager in a food and beverage manufacturing organisation. In later years, I've consulted and we've delivered different platforms into food and beverage organisations, and been a supplier. So I spent a number of years with suppliers that actually supplied the food and beverage organisations. So supply chain and those sort of things are important, as well as the manufacturing component, the distribution piece that go around what a food and beverage organisation needs to actually be efficient.
Absolutely. Well, we're so excited to learn from you today and kind of garner some best practices around food and beverage and digital transformation. Just to test out our chat feature here, if you could just drop in the chat wherever you're viewing, where you're joining us from today. We typically have a pretty global audience, and we always like to see where our audience members are joining us from today. So if you could just pop that in the chat. And Wayne, let's start off with, what are some key nuances or considerations when going through a digital transformation, a software selection, technology implementation, if you are in the food and beverage space?
Yeah, it's interesting why food and beverage is slightly different, and the key focus for many food and beverage manufacturers is to be able to look at their supply chains, to be able to base their predicted production based on what's coming in and what they can ship out. And so planning and scheduling and those sort of things are real strong focuses for food and beverage. And I suppose the other driving factor of that is food and beverage is traditionally low margin. So it doesn't attract the really high margin. So you've got to be good at what you do, effective what you do, and make sure that you understand what the cost impacts are by some of the decisions that you make. And that's a real, I suppose, an underlying difference between food and beverage and many other industries.
That's a really good point. And speaking of margin and overall budgeting and cost, obviously an ERP implementation is a huge investment for any type of business, specifically food and beverage when we're talking about small to medium-sized businesses as well. So what are some cost considerations that you can utilize when you are in a food and beverage space or environment and considering selecting a new software?
Well, I suppose there's the traditional way that people would look at selecting a software, and that is, many used SAP as their platform, and that's one of because it's a finance package, and we would leverage off that finance package. Today, it's probably a little bit different in the sense that we've caught up with the fact that not only have we finances, we have targeted solutions, and so that's a way to be able to get something which is focused and actually cost effective to actually deliver. Whereas, if you try and do something that it shouldn't, there's a lot of cost that goes with that. And I think that's where we're starting to see the differences in the food and beverage area, is that they are looking at how they operate, what they need to operate, as against say, well, we've got finance. How do we bolt something on to be able to get our finances to work? And that's that difference. And it obviously is adding up for better outcomes and obviously savings when it comes to what sort of solution you're putting in.
Absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. When you're looking at specifically a food and beverage system, you mentioned SAP, which obviously SAP S/4HANA is a global, very complex system. What are some other specific systems or even applications that you've seen that are specific to the food and beverage industry?
Yeah, we've just been through actually an evaluation exercise for two clients that are in the food and beverage, different sectors of the food and beverage, but and two that came to be high profile and really had good coverage of the requirements. Was Info M3 is one of those that's a well credentialed solution. Pronto is another one that is actually, it's an Australian based ERP that covers lots of industries, but it really supports food and beverage well, and it has a footprint in the US, so it is sold and used by clients in the US. So it's a global footprint, but it's actually an Australian software provider, which is rare.
That's great. Well, you always have to be loyal to your local countrymen, right?
Yeah. Well, when they provide a good product, you don't mind, but I like to be fairly. If it's a bad product, I wouldn't mention it. So.
Oh no, absolutely. That agnostic runs deep within you, Wayne. Absolutely. So another kind of interesting piece that we've seen specifically in emerging technology with food and beverage is just the challenges in energy and supply chain. So being kind of an expert in that supply chain and distribution with food and beverage, what are some ways in which you've seen your clients leverage emerging technologies to support that supply chain breakage or even energy crisis?
I suppose there's two areas to it. In that there's the energy area, which is how do we actually produce for the cheapest cost, and obviously we use a lot of energy when we are producing and manufacturing, and so we want to be able to make sure that what we are saying we are going to produce, we are producing as such. We don't want holdups and we don't want delays, because that just adds to the cost of what we're producing. So energy, things like gas, LPG, a lot of those feed energy costs are rising rapidly here in Australia, and my understanding is across the globe. And so you've got to be efficient and effective in what you are saying you're going to produce, so you can actually produce it for the price that you had estimated it would be produced, and you don't have any wastage. So there's that aspect to it. The other aspect is the supply chain piece, which is probably globally has been a real problem for all organizations. Supply chains have been broken in the sense that, we've had delays. We can't get the supply chains to be efficient end to end. And so if we're sourcing products from overseas or shipping products to overseas destinations, supply chain, having visibility of supply chain is important. And so many times we buy products, and if we don't have visibility of that actually coming in and being delivered in full, or an understanding of the delays that might happen, whether it be shipping, whether it be road freight, whether it be weather events, whether it be those sorts of things, then it impacts our ability to produce what we're looking to produce. And so the visibility piece, where you've got vendors and suppliers actually having that knowledge and insight about what's happening from the end-to-end supply chain, is one that's really important, that a lot of food manufacturers and beverage producers are actually looking for. Because why go ahead and look to produce something if you know it's not going to arrive, and you run that risk of having the line already and you can't actually produce it. So the cost of that production, that's waste as such in the end. So having, I suppose there's two areas to that. It's one of how much am I producing, and am I producing it as I said I would? And secondly, have I got visibility of what's coming in, and can I use that? Because even if I've got perishable products, I might have the problem where if I've bought some perishable products, but I'm also reliant on other products, and they don't come in at the same time, then the problem I have is I can't produce. I can't produce the product I've got. And so the risk that I have is that the perishable products might go off before I actually achieve the other, receive the other products. And so you can see it's very complex. Food manufacture and beverage has a lot of complexity to it.
So with that complexity, I assume that a new technology implementation needs to be very, very intentional and mindful and strategic in going into these organizations, specifically with implementation in a food and beverage environment. And you mentioning those margins are not huge. So any sort of disruption to the business is obviously going to cost a lot of money and wasted revenue. So what are some tactics that you can actually use during implementation to make sure that you're hitting all of these complexities and you're not losing any money in any sort of breakage in go live?
One of the areas that we really focus on is the planning and scheduling piece. And that's an integral part to getting good value out of your ERP, because your ERP will provide you the information if you capture it. And so you can make good decisions based on that. So one of the key areas that we look at is how I can actually widen my window of understanding what's coming to me, what I'm going to produce, what people want to buy from me. So my demand. How do I widen that window? So by putting in forecasting and accuracy of what actually is supplied, and providing that visibility for the organization, that allows them to actually, it's not reactionary anymore. We have a level of predictability, and it's interesting that when we start to line up, demand with manufacturing requirements, so MRP and those sorts of terms or processes, and then what we're producing at the shop floor, then we can actually get certainty on what we can distribute to our customers, and then we overlay that with our finances, so we can actually plan. If we're purchasing this, we plan to produce this and distribute this, we will get paid for this, and so all of a sudden our financial planning comes together with that, and so it is all linked together.
Right.
But working with organizations to understand it's not just finance, it's making sure those other things align, so we reduce the leakage that we have from inefficiency, and that's that works well in that low margin space that food and beverage is.
Yeah, and it sounds like that target operating model and those business processes are going to be really key in achieving a successful digital transformation. So how do you help your clients define their target operating model in such a complex ecosystem?
That's a great question, because it's one that many overlook, is how are we going to operate? And it sounds like a simple question, but given any one business, they will operate that suits their competitive advantage in the market that they service. And so what we do is work with them to actually identify things called operating principles. So what are the principles that we want to adopt that we can actually see that would be delivered in a digital transformation, whether it be process, whether it be the technology piece, whether it be the information that's available to us. And so by identifying that, right at the start, really getting that understanding of operating model, how we're going to operate, we can then build a functional architecture for the software. So we can say, what is it that we need? What modules do we need? How's this all going to fit together and actually provide us end-to-end process? And so when we start breaking it down in those segments, all of a sudden we start to be able to get the linkage between what the technology will give us and how we will operate. And that's probably has been the defining difference that we see with clients, that once they get that right, they really do. They become really profitable on the basis that they're taking away a lot of those gaps and leakages, as I call it, of efficiency, which costs. It's a cost to the business as such. And so by getting that right, then when they actually deliver the solution at the end of the day, they can say, it actually operates as we wanted it to operate. And so I get value out of the solution I've purchased. And then I can just continuously improve how I operate because I've got good information available to me.
Absolutely. And that excess, which you rightfully defined as cost, when you have a broken or inefficient process. So identifying that sounds like it's, a key tactic to ensuring that you're able to address, strategize, and ultimately resolve that issue. And I know when you're an expert in process mining, which you help a lot of our clients go through, our food and beverage clients, those types of different things, how specifically can you utilize process mining to identify any sort of broken processes to fix for that target operating model?
Yeah, and processes are the basis of what we're looking to achieve here, because if we have a broken process, we don't get that efficiency. So process mining is about looking at how many times people don't use the system to actually do what they need to do. So we call them workarounds. And so when we look at process mining, we can use tools to do that, or we can actually break it down in a manual way and actually look at what are the process steps we do, and where do we go out and use a spreadsheet, or where do we go out and use some other information that may not be accurate, may not be the source of truth that allows us to make the best decision. And so processes are a key part of where we work with organizations. And as part of our change program, it's about saying, well, what are the gaps that we actually have? So identifying those gaps. And so we've got a process where we work with organizations, send our change rep out to actually do a gap analysis on site with all the people to be able to understand how often do they deviate from what should be a standard practice. And then we can actually work two ways. One is we can align the technology to actually what the processes should be, but it also gives us the amount of change that we actually need to and target that change to the people where it's required, because lots of people do it because they either don't know, there's no other option, the solution doesn't support their information requirements. And so by knowing those, all of a sudden we actually have a very clear picture about change, about how those processes can be implemented and where we should focus our change effort.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's a great holistic view around how to potentially solve for inefficiencies, specifically not only in processes, but in your overall culture as an organization too, and leveraging technology to do so. Specifically, kind of coming back to the food and beverage area, I'm curious if there's any sort of commonalities when you look at process inefficiencies that you see throughout specifically food and beverage clients. What are some of their pain points when it comes to operating models?
I think the one that stands out the greatest of all is the knowledge about what they're producing. So they call them bill of materials, and what you find often is that the bill of materials is meant to be the source of, here's the materials I need, here's how much it costs, here's how much it's going to take to produce it. So there's a lot of information in a good bill of material for a particular item, and a lot of that is not clear, it's not concise, it's not kept into one system, and so what you find there is that's probably the centerpiece where that failure starts from, is the sense that we can't rely on the bill of materials, we have to keep changing it. Our costs can't be factored into that, so we can't understand how much is it costing us to produce. And so the bill of materials area is a real weak link when it comes to the maintaining of bill of materials and the updating and keeping them current is a big area that food and beverage struggle with, because as you would probably have seen, raw materials have gone up through the roof as such, and so not to mention raw materials, but also a number of other supply materials, packaging, and those sorts of things have increased. If we aren't keeping an eye on that and understanding what it takes in our bill of materials, then it makes it very difficult for us as an organisation to actually produce and stay within the margins that we have identified and that we're actually selling for. Because at the end of the day, we might sell, but if we're selling for less than what it costs us to produce, there's a very short road to survival there, isn't there?
Absolutely. That is a very short road to survival. So 2 questions about that bill of materials, because I think there's, some really interesting nuggets we can kind of mine from what you just said and that great advice. So when it comes to distributors, a lot of times, typically in specifically larger food and beverage businesses, there's not a ton of variety in suppliers. So getting those raw materials and paying that premium seems to be something that there's not a lot of diversity, or there's not a lot of solve around being able to do that cost effectively. So we always say, if you're experiencing supply chain shortage, breakage, anything like that, the first thing to do is really take a hard look at your suppliers. And understanding that there might be a diversification of being able to produce them yourself, or acquire a company that produces them. Is that kind of the same for food and beverage, or can you take us through the state of actually getting those raw materials?
Yeah, and it's an important point that you raised there, because our suppliers are vital to us as producers, but we need to have relationships with those suppliers so that they can actually either gear up to our requirements and understand what our requirements are. It's not like I just contact you and buy something and hope that it's going to be right. In the old days, that was probably an easier way to go. But these days, it's a lot more complex, and there's a lot more components that go into it. And so building long-term relationships where you've got a supply window, here's how much we produce a year, so we're going to need this much product. Do you think you could do that? And you adjust prices on that sort of basis, so that you're actually buying on a quantity level over a period of time, as a lot level, which is pretty unpredictable as such, because someone else might come and buy that lot before you get there, and that's where some of the supply chain issues come from. So it's taking that step back and looking at how do we actually get certainty or predictability in our relationships with not only our customers, but also with our suppliers. And that can provide that ability to be able to help them gear up, so prices can go down because they're scaled to actually suit what our requirements are. And we can also, when there's a shortage on their part, we can actually adjust what our production plans are, so that we can actually wait till that's not a problem anymore, and we can actually deal with it that way. So it is I suppose it's one of those areas that we need to be able to take a different view. It's not we don't just in time works in a supply, but when we're actually purchasing, we want to be able to have a longer term view than just this just in time view that often we get caught with, in the fact that we just want it when we want it, sort of thing. Well, that's true, but I need to have a lot more other things in place so that I can get it when I just want it.
And is that a use case for emerging technologies such as AI or machine learning, kind of in that forecasting, to be able to, in a healthy way, predict what you will need as far as that relationship with that supplier? Is that something you would recommend?
Oh yeah, because what AI allows you to do, if you've set it up well, it allows you to predict some of the trends and provide some models, and you can bring in additional information. So if I've got raw materials like, I'm looking at vegetables or those sorts of things, that might be something, they are seasonal and depending on the season. So I can start to look at it and say, well, if I overlay some other information there, my likelihood of being able to buy what I want to buy from that supplier in that region would be compromised, because if they're going to have a dry season, we're not going to be able to get as much. So I might need to look for another supplier to be able to bolster my requirements as such. And so AI provides that really important insight to be able to say, well, I can bring other factors in which actually drive my decision making and help me with my forecasting. And that's an area that it's still very early days that people do that. And it really should be something that they work with their vendors or with their suppliers to be able to say, well, we need this, and what's happening? Are you going to supply it? And be able to, really get a clear understanding and relationship built on what could be supplied, and not let the other vendor see that, well, they're going somewhere else. They're going somewhere else because the supply is that, and so
Exactly.
the relationship stays strong, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. I think that's so true and such a great way to explain that. And so we've seen specifically, we've talked to some different thought leaders on the space in our Ground Control podcast, which is available wherever you get your podcast. Wayne has been on Ground Control multiple times. But in a recent episode, we featured actually a software vendor, which we rarely do. But because of the emergence of AI, specifically in supply chain, as an additional kind of niche software add-on to these bigger, more complex systems. Is that something that you've seen for specifically your food and beverage arena? Those types of kind of more third tier systems emerge in supporting these types of new processes?
Yeah, there's becoming a greater need. I think as we get pressured with how do we fix this problem of supply chains and being able to stay viable in a certain industry, you start to look outside and start to see, well, what else can I do? AI is showing that it has good application in that area, and you've got to be it's not just a software vendor, one of the mainstream software vendors that actually provides good AI. It's a level of people understanding a function that you're looking to achieve that actually can work with the solution. And so we're seeing that happen, and we're working with a client at the moment who has some really advanced forecasting methodology, but it leverages AI because it's looking at trends, it's looking at the information, then providing the algorithms that actually give you the predictability and the level of trust that you can actually have in the models is really, really exciting to think that they could get that close. And I think that's a great advancement and a great, I suppose, advertisement for AI and its application in certain instances.
We're here listening to a clip of Kyler and Wayne from Third Stage Consulting talking about a food and beverage case study. We're going to take a quick break and we'll continue the conversation when we return. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 95. We're here playing you a clip of a food and beverage case study discussion between Kyler and Wayne Holtham out of Third Stage APAC. Let's continue the conversation.
I want to kind of shift gears and talk a little bit about some specific nuances or considerations for the food and beverage industry, and specifically talking about compliance. So they're heavily regulated in many other areas, and we see that in a lot of industries, oil and gas, for example, aerospace, those types of other pieces. And we really have to take that into consideration when recommending a software or taking them through an evaluation. Is that something that you experienced as well with some of your food and beverage based organizations?
Yeah, because food, we talk about oil and gas can actually be harmful to you if it catches fire or blows up and those sorts of things. Food in the other way can actually be harmful if it's actually contaminated or it loses its quality as such. And so it can be a health harm. And these days with allergies, with a lot of the things we start seeing people are impacted by, then we need to be able to have a very clear understanding of what goes into our food, the traceability they talk about from paddock to plate. So that's a real important factor for the food and beverage industry. And so whether it be dairy, whether it be food manufacture of any produced or manufactured food products, it could be baby food, could be ready meals, could be any of those sorts of things. If we aren't sure that the quality is there and we've actually maintained all of those parameters that keep that quality high, then that's an area that organisations are very, very responsible for as such from a legislative point of view, but also want to monitor as well, because it does impact brand reputation. It impacts a lot of other areas of their business. And so when we talk about the compliance part, there's two aspects to it. There's the legislative part, as well as the brand and the fact of the impact to our business as such. So and you start to see where quality assurance capture is everything from what comes in the door to what goes out of the door and along the supply chain. So we're measuring and making sure if we've got frozen products, it stays frozen. There's none of it that actually gets to a point where it actually doesn't stay frozen. And so we monitor and capture all of that. And we need to be able to make sure that we are keeping an eye on that so that we can be sure that our product, as it's been supplied, as it's been sold, has maintained all of those standards. And that's more of a responsibility for the manufacturer as the middle person, to be able to maintain and define those.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's such a huge complexity. How specifically do systems help support the compliance or that visibility to needing to have that as far as that quality assurance factor you mentioned?
Yeah, I suppose we're now at a point where we can capture information all the way along the supply chain. Whether it be the forklift driver who's bringing it in can take a temperature and upload that. So at a point in time, you can see what the temperature of a product was when it came in. When you're distributing it, you can actually measure the temperature and the time and how long it was in the truck and all of those sort of things. So you get a really clear picture of what's happened along the supply chain, along the delivery chain. In the past, that was difficult because we had people writing on a piece of paper. Today, we can capture that in real time. And that allows us to be able to bring that back and now analyze that information to be able to give us that insight and make sure that our quality is high, but also pinpoint where it's not, and then we can address that. So the new systems give us a much wider opportunity to be able to capture information and then be able to review and analyze that information. Whereas, like I say, in the past, we relied on the fact that it was all okay, and it was only by exception, and when we had a problem, we had to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one piece that many people don't understand, the pressure that goes into actual compliance understanding and quality assurance, specifically for food and beverage. For example, Third Stage actually just won here in the States on the Inc. 5000 list, which means the fastest 5,000 growing companies domestically. And we, our North America team went to the conference, and one of the keynote speakers was actually a founder of a baby food company and talked about the challenges with the baby food shortage and really only a handful of suppliers that had to completely shut down. And because of the regulations, it's very difficult to actually produce any other type of baby formula because almost the monopoly they had in the marketplace when it comes to competition. So I wonder, Wayne, in that type of setting where you have that overall arching compliance, how does that fit into your digital transformation strategy? Is that kind of a phase 0 consideration? Does that come at the beginning? Is that just a box you check at the end? Where does that kind of fit?
That comes right at the beginning. That's part of that operating model, and it's about product traceability, it's about product quality, it's about those sorts of things, because that's one of those competitive advantages that you actually have, and you need to maintain. It's almost the basis or the reason for being as such. And so when you're in that space, whether it be baby formulas, as you mentioned there, the dairy side of things that relates to, or the pre-produced food, baby, toddler food and those sorts of things. All of that relies on very high levels of quality and understanding of that the product is not harmful in any way. And so that is a very much a going in position, and it's checked all along the way to make sure that, you know, the information, the data flows are very, very traceable, and you can actually at any point you can actually see where you've got something that actually is going wrong.
Absolutely. And I wonder if I could ask you specifically. I know we've talked a lot about food distribution, manufacturing, those types of things, but we've seen really the restaurant, so the business to consumer model completely flip in the last 2 years because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And arguably, they had the most urgency or even desperation to go through a digital transformation to be able to do things like to-go food, delivery, those types of addressing labor shortage in the COVID-19 pandemic, specifically in that food and beverage sector. What has been kind of your experience or some of your observations of how that's evolved and changed when it comes to digital transformation?
It's interesting because the view on the client or the customer that most organizations have is that they would manufacture to an order and that would be provided. And what's changed is the fact that, you know, many food manufacturers now have that view that they can actually provide almost ready to go products that become for a restaurant, they become a contributor to the food, so the final finished food. And so you can add some final pieces to it, but it reduces the need to have as many people in a kitchen as such, and supports that view that you've got quality ingredients that are of a standard that a restaurant might serve, that are unique enough for a restaurant to serve. And so there's that view of the way that I suppose preformed ingredients is what I would call it, are manufactured now and supplied, and they actually feed the restaurant industry and the ready to serve food industry in a much bigger way than that it did in the past. And it's leveraged from that fact that, you know, people aren't available. COVID caused a lot of issues when it came to producing food. How do we get there and be able to manage and still provide with ingredients that we don't have to make from scratch?
Yeah, we do you have Chipotle in Australia? Have you ever heard of that?
Yes, I have. Yes.
Yeah. Do you have them there or no?
No, not yet. No.
No, not yet. Well, they're coming. They started in Colorado as our claim to fame. They were in our neighborhood, but we did a case study again on ground control of the smart kitchen and the use of AI and actually robotics to kind of combat that labor shortage while creating more efficiencies and creating that compliance where it's simply healthier because of the fact that you don't have human interaction with your food. So do you feel like just like smart manufacturing floors we talk about are the future? Do you think smart kitchens would be the future for food and beverage as an emerging technology?
I think they have to be. You know, what we're seeing here in Australia and seeing globally as well is the fact that we don't have the skilled staff around to be able to provide service as we did in the past. And so being out, how do we augment that? How do we actually reduce the cost of you know, supplying, producing, manufacturing, servicing that clientele? How do we do that? And a lot of it is AI, it's robotics, it's those sorts of things that allow us to be able to do that. And so I think that's going to be the revolution when it comes to restaurants, you know, larger scale restaurants, to be able to leverage and really be able to stay competitive in that sort of market.
Yeah, the no contact kitchen. Well, very cool. As I ask all of my burning trending questions, I want to give you some time to kind of take our audience through some of the case studies that you've been working with in the food and beverage industry, specifically within software selection and implementation. So if you could kind of give us company size, that how you took them through an evaluation or a selection, and give us some maybe key nuances or a description around what that looked like as far as your client work.
One springs to mind is a food manufacturer. They're in a specific sector of the food manufacturing area. They're Asian food here in Australia. They are one of the largest producers of Asian food, and so you know, they supply nationally, and they also import products as well as manufacture their own products. And so for them, it was about saying, well, we want to go on a digital transformation journey. And so they asked us to be part of that. And for us, it was about building that operating model to start with. So you've gotten to this point. What now? How would you like to operate in the future? And how will you know that you're operating that way? So when we actually are delivering a solution, how would you be able to recognize that in your business? And that's a key first step for us, is to be able to identify that, and they identify how they operate and where they want to go. So it gives them that ownership and, that executive alignment as such, because it's interesting when you actually work with clients, we assume that everybody's on the same page, and that's not always the case. And so by getting everybody on the same page, you actually get a uniform way of moving forward. And as against saying, well, this department wants this and this department wants that. And, at the end of the day, you end up where you've got a bit of a mishmash of requirements as such. So that's the first area we work with. And then we start looking at, okay, well, really, where is your focus in your business? And some people will say, I'm a food manufacturer wholly and solely. I do distribution as part of what I do, but I am a food manufacturer. Whereas others will be a brand manufacturer, a brand that does manufacturing. So you might find some of your bigger organizations manage a brand. That's all they're worried about. And the manufacturing becomes not as much of their focus. And often they'll contract that out. And so really, how do you want to operate is a really key question, and determining what you need. From there, we actually look at it. Then what are the processes? So do you have forecasting, understand demand management, have sales and operations planning as part of your the way you actually know how much you need to actually make and manufacture, so you can actually cost that, and work our way through those sort of, I suppose, principles of manufacturing. They're traditional manufacturing principles, but many organizations have lost that. And I think because they brought technology in, it would solve all of their problems as they believed. But if you don't understand the fundamentals and apply the fundamental principles of things like planning and scheduling and forecasting and those sorts of things, it makes it very difficult for them to be able to just use technology as the solution as such. And so that's once we work with that, we start then in the implementation phase. All of a sudden, we've got some really clear processes that we are engaging with and onboarding people with, and getting them, creating the awareness about what they are and how they work and what it means, and then understand the data that it takes to drive that. Because that's the key point, is if we don't have good, clean data sets, then our ability to be able to leverage and have reporting information is quite difficult. And so we're with a client now where we're through the selection process, we're in the implementation. And what they're finding is, as they build this solution, the quality of data they're actually bringing together to actually feed the solution is far better than they've ever had. And they've had this, it's more like an acquisition where they're actually revamping the business, and they acquisitioned a new business into it. And so it's like a revitalization of a platform that was already working in one of the organizations. And so you think, well, they would have a pretty good handle on it. But when you realize they really didn't use their software solution in any way apart from finance. And that's a thing we see often. And so now they actually understand what it takes to drive that, the data needs, the way they can use the system. And so they're the sort of things that you start to see out the other end, where you get ownership of the way they work as well as the solution they're building. And that's a great outcome that we're starting to see from that client in particular.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I mean, what a great success story. I mean, you hit on so many things there when it comes to executive alignment, mergers and acquisitions, a complete, rebuild of processes. That sounds like a lot of change. Can you talk a little bit about change management or anything you might have experienced when it comes to resistance, or how does a business go through that amount of change, even if they have the best intentions to be better? There must be some shifting and, a little bit of just overall transition in all of those kind of new processes.
Yeah, I suppose we start back at the basics, that the reason people don't do what they do is because they probably don't know any better. And there's no bad thinking in that. It's just the fact that from their knowledge and the decisions they make, that's what they have. So for us, it's about taking them on the journey of, what is it that these processes are? What are and understand the why piece. And so awareness and education. And then we also overlay, well, here's how the solution works or the system would work to actually do this. And for them, the why becomes, that makes sense to me. Now I'm on the journey of change. And so for us, then we steward them all the way through the change process with us providing information, support, that leadership, that knowledge that they are looking for as they keep growing their knowledge about it. And so they become the change champions themselves, and they are supported by us, which is a small team, to be able to help them understand, well, if I did this, what does that mean? That interpretation piece. And so when it gets to the end of the solution, they own that solution. They see us as being, well, you guys helped us along the way, but it's funny how they take that ownership because they really know and understand their business far better than we ever will. But we can provide that objectivity of questioning and here's what processes are, and we can sort of pinpoint where maybe their gaps are, and focus them on those areas. And that's essentially our change process. And we have task force, we call it, and those task force go in and they really start to earn the knowledge and learn that area of their business intimately. And that's strong because it stays with the business. It doesn't walk out the door.
Yeah, that's such a great approach, and that empowerment of understanding you have this new process and it might be different, but having the ability to kind of have those results of clean data, of clean forecasting, all of those different pieces to showcase people is really, really powerful, most certainly. That sounds like an unbelievable case study, and well done to the third stage APAC team and to the client and our vendor partners all involved in that project. And we can't wait to hear more about it. So if you have a food and beverage client come to you and you're kind of in the first stages of conversations, what are some first steps that you recommend that they take to ensure that they're really ready for a digital transformation, or to start to engage with a partner like Third Stage?
It's interesting because each client is different in where they are on their journey. And just going back to that previous case study, the executive had gotten together and identified the requirements or the things that they would have liked from the system as such, or from an ERP if they put it in. And so for us, we started to look at what they actually had, because some of the work the thinking that already put in place is quite valuable for us to be able to look at where they are, how far along the journey they are. If they're very high level and we just wanted to solve the world problems, then your approach is different. Whereas if they've actually got some good thinking in there, then we start to leverage that thinking and start to then work with them about building that operating model and building those, the functional design of what they might be looking at in the solution as such, and what level of change it might mean to their business, and where they might see the benefits of the business. Because we always look at, how do I realize the benefits? I need to know that before I actually spend the money, not after I've spent the money. And that's it's not a software practice that vendors like to consider. Whereas for us, that's one of those things. If I'm going to spend, I want to see where that return investment actually is going to come from, not a theoretical belief of where it might come from. And so that's usually where we start, is those sorts of things, because that gets everybody engaged on the one page sort of thing. They understand what they might be getting out of this, why they're doing it, and what the benefits might be.
Yeah, that unified strategic alignment is certainly important. And then also understanding, I think you hit on something that's very important, especially in more niche industries where you do have a lot of complexities, is just understanding that professional skepticism when it comes to vendors and what their sort of agenda is. That doesn't have to be a negative thing. They just have a specific job, and it might not be to completely attach to the organization's actual business value goals. So I think that's a really great point as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting. One of the interesting side things that comes out of doing the approach well is you actually get vendors to actually, if they really want to supply the solution, they become very engaged and very involved and want to be part of it. they're not the supply. The view of just this sales model becomes less of an issue. It's more that we actually want to actually supply a good solution.
Mm-hmm.
And we just recently had one where which software selected down to 3 different options, and we were going through the demonstration phase. And one of the vendors came to us and said, for us to be able to provide this solution, it would be this much money. And I said, well, it's not about the money. It's about whether the solution would actually deliver for the organization. And he said, well, no, unless they commit that this is the sort of money they want to spend, then, we wouldn't be interested in doing a demonstration. I think that signals the shift in the market, where you've got some big players who run on brands and say, we are, and this is a global brand. So it's one of those software companies that is everywhere in the globe. And their view was that, well, unless they can commit to this price, and it was a really out there price. It was, it really wasn't value for money. And so, that was a great outcome for the client, because all of a sudden they realized these people are interested in our business. These people are just looking to say, well, I can give you this for this much, guarantee you it'll work, without actually going through and being prepared to show that it would work. And that was a really, really valuable insight for us, and also the client.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, every time, sometimes I think I'm not going to be surprised on what comes out of a software vendor's mouth. I'm always like, what are you even talking about? And we, along those lines, and we won't digress too much, but I think it's an important overall consideration. We recently had Marcus Harris, whom on our live stream, who is an attorney when it comes to contracting. And he's talked a lot about, with COVID and the emergence of remote demos and the overall recording of demos, has been a huge pain point for a lot of different clients, because the vendors don't want their demonstrations recorded, which to me is like the weirdest. Like, why wouldn't you want it record? Like, what would be the difference? Are you about to show something that's not actually possible? Is that why you're like hesitant to that? So it's always so interesting to me, those different conversations that happen, and hopefully those are always seen as good opportunities for clients to say, maybe this isn't the best partner for me.
Well, that's right. And I think it's probably the step towards making the software vendor salesperson more accountable. And many times in the heat of the discussion, they're showing the bells and whistles and all the shiny things that happen there, and they'll probably throw out a line that gives someone will pick up on and make that and go, well, that's my expectation of what we're going to achieve, or it's going to be delivered to us. And then when it gets delivered, it's not delivered. And in the past, it was, whereas now you can actually go back and play that back and say, well, no, I did actually ask that question, and here's what you said. And so from I'm sure from Marcus's point of view, that would be great evidence to be able to support, an expert witness case should it go forward.
It's a dream. And speaking of expert witness cases, Wayne, you are one of our expert witnesses here at Third Stage. So kind of going above food and beverage, when we do engage in an expert witness case, obviously it's not a great scenario. There's litigation going on. There's, huge costs in lawsuits, especially if they need to bring in an unbiased expert, which is another big part of what we do here at Third Stage, because we don't have any sort of financial or relationship ties to specific vendors. So that makes us completely independent. So what is one of the main failure points that you see in your expert witness work when it comes to a failed implementation?
It's interesting, and it happens so often, is the fact that the vendor or the solution integrator, they apply a methodology, and that methodology is designed to actually come in, understand what you need, build a solution, test a solution, and deliver a solution. But the bit that they fail on is the fact that they don't really understand what the business does need. And so they put very little energy into that front end piece of really understanding, is our solution going to fit the way this business works, or can't change, and in some organizations, although we have this view that we want to be able to have, vanilla something or a very standardized approach, but in reality, we may have, situations that we can't change, especially in the labor sides of things. We may have enterprise bargaining agreements that lock us into certain conditions, and we can't just go standardized, because it's bound by legislation that we've actually got these conditions we have to apply to or respond to. And so the challenge you have there is the vendor comes in and they go, yeah, we'll go standard. And then you find that later on, they realize that standard could never have worked. And all they do is just keep going, well, we'll add some more change requests in it, and we'll do some things and changes. And you end up with a solution that doesn't meet the brief at the end of the day. The business is disrupted. And they're the sort of challenges that you have. And I think that's where, these standard practices where we have a approach of deploying a solution misses many of those things about the business. The knowledge of the business is not there. And that's a key area that we find. And then it's hard for that technical leadership piece because commercials get in the way of actual what you should deliver.
Absolutely. That's such a great way to kind of put it. And so as a organization learning from that, especially in an industry as complex as food and beverage, how can you ensure that your vendor partners completely understand, commit, and remain accountable for your business goals with the transformation project to avoid that very costly failure?
It's interesting. One of our clients has engaged us for an insurance governance piece, and so what we do there is we sort of sit between the client and the vendor, and we apply a methodology of entry and exit for the phases. And so it's making sure that you get delivery in full at the end of a phase prior to going into the next phase. And one of the big risks that happen and you see in the expert witness stuff is that the phases blend together, and all of a sudden we're doing things in a later phase and we haven't completed the first lot of information. And so what we find is that this governance thing actually brings real clarity to the solution integrator. Here's what you must be delivering, because here's what we're going to endorse and sign off as the steering committee and as us supporting the steering committee to do that. And it's a real change in dynamic, because all of a sudden the software vendor the first time's been held accountable. And so that's something that is really important for not only the client, but the software vendor actually responds to that and can deliver that. Where they're not held accountable, that's one of the challenges where they feel, well, we can just keep the clock ticking, and we'll get to the end, and what we don't, we'll just add an extra change request in to actually solve that problem. And so that assurance piece or methodology that we apply really brings that accountability, and also back to the organization as well, because if they were meant to provide information to the vendor and haven't, then that accountability is also quite clear. And so it's a level of responsibility that's there, not just washed over and dealt with later sort of thing. So that's an important one that we see benefits from when we support implementations.
Yeah, the quality assurance is, I always like to explain to it as it's almost like an insurance policy for your overall digital transformation. You wouldn't drive your car down the street without insurance because that's a huge risk for the driver and other people just in society in general. And it's kind of the same piece with quality assurance and risk mitigation. And I would assume, and again, you're the expert, so correct me if I'm wrong here, there is a heightened level of risk when you are in a food and beverage and high pressure entity where you have low margins, you have perishable foods. That must be more important or a higher need for quality insurance.
Oh, very much. And also the risk to disruption. So if you have a disruption in your supply chain when you have deployed, that becomes a huge risk for an organization. So if you don't get it right and everything doesn't work on the day, then the business can actually really, really suffer, because they can't produce, they can't supply. There's so many factors that actually impact their ability to stay viable and solvent in those situations. So it is a big one. And when you talk about assurance, it's interesting. You see some providers provide assurance, but they don't really provide assurance as we talk about it. They provide a governance where they might review some documents and that sort of thing. They don't actually work with the client and the vendor to actually hold them to account. And I think that's the difference we talk about with assurance. I see big projects fail where they've had a number of different consulting firms being the assurance partner as such, and that yet it still failed. And you go, well, how could it have failed if we'd applied a methodology that actually, and we'd actually gone to the effort of putting an assurance partner in? How did it still fail? And that's often you start to see that they never pulled those things up. They let things happen. They were very third stage, or I won't say third stage, because third stage actually monitors it, but they keep an arm's length to the project. And I don't think you can actually keep an arm's length when you are providing assurance and governance. You need to be in there and part of that whole steering committee, the governance piece, understanding the deliverables and making sure that you've actually got oversight of that. And that's where you get good governance.
Absolutely. And to the third stage piece of it, it's that independence, because there's only one goal and one engagement with independent consultants, and that is the full accountability to the success of the client's project. There's no other financial agenda in selling software, in working with a specific system integrator. And I think that's the biggest piece that we've seen a huge emergence in just our clients' desire for that independent program assurance, because there's so much happening in that complexities. And again, so many competing agendas. Having that one North Star that's able to speak the language, understand, the red flags that come with a very expensive and risky implementation, and then also just be that coach, that digital transformation coach of how are we going to get to that target operating model? How are we going to get that really clean data that's going to benefit and maximize our business value? And having that advocate is really what we've seen as an emergence. And that's why we've grown so fast, because it's just not something that the marketplace has ever really had within it. It's fallen on organizations to provide that, to your point. And you don't know what you don't know, right? When you build a house, usually you wouldn't have a general contractor do the plumbing, because that's just not their expertise. And the plumber doesn't care if you sell the house, right? So there needs to be someone involved in that to ensure that business goals are actually being achieved, and they're able to navigate that narrative that isn't so incredibly complex, especially within the food and beverage community.
Yeah, you've summed that up so well, because that is one of the things, I think, that independence piece, where I can rely on what I'm hearing without knowing it's biased, or knowing that I'm training someone in actually my business along the way. The one thing that we do bring is that expertise and that knowledge, which is important, because if you've been down that road before, and the expert witness stuff helps with this, in the sense that you can actually provide that leadership and knowledge and I call it interpretation. When something happens, what does that actually mean? What's the consequence of that? And unpacking that for organizations is a really important step for them to be able to understand what decision they should make.
All right. Thank you, Kyler and Wayne. Thanks for playing that clip, or being part of that clip that we could now repurpose on this podcast. So thank you for doing that. We've got a few things we're going to unpack and talk about, but first we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we recently hosted our Digital Stratosphere 2022 virtual event. It's 3 days of packed content related to digital transformation best practices, about 16 or 18 different workshops and different speakers that are presenting on different topics, everything you need to know about transformation. The bad news is if you miss that event, the event's over. The live event already happened. But the good news, if you've missed it, or even if you did attend it and you want to see replays, or you want to catch the sessions you missed, you can do that now by going to stratosphere2022.com. Go to stratosphere2022.com, register. All you have to do is put in your name and email address, just a few fields. You get immediate access to all the recordings, and the recordings cover everything from digital strategy, software selection, organizational change, process improvement, architecture, data migration, cloud, trends in the industry, how to avoid failure, some of the legal aspects to think about, contractual aspects to think about as it relates to your transformation. All that is stuff that you'll get by registering for Stratosphere 2022 replay. And again, go to stratosphere2022.com and you can listen to all the replays of all the workshops that you might have missed at the event. So hope you check it out, and thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 95. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Khalid Cheatham, and we just had Wayne Holtham on the show, and we played this clip of you interviewing Wayne Holtham that you did recently. What were some of your takeaways from that conversation, Kyler?
Well, I always learn so much from Wayne every single time I talk to him. I really, truly do. I keep waiting for the day where I'm like, oh, yeah, you've said that before. But no, he never does that. He always brings such a wealth of knowledge and is so eloquent in the way that he teaches us about specific industries. And the thing that is so interesting about food and beverage specifically is just the complexities that you don't really consider in a lot of other, say, mainstream, if you will, manufacturing, if that's even a thing anymore. But food and beverage has just such additional consideration, not only on how they do their own processes, but keeping up with the emerging technologies when it comes to energy regulations and then compliance when it comes to the specific food and beverage. I know we talked about a few different emerging technologies when it comes to smart kitchens and robotics in the use of food and beverage. We kind of started our conversation around that and then moved into the specifics of the work that Wayne and team do for our food and beverage clients in that area. But it's one of those things that you never really consider that until that is part of your operating model, and you have to continue to kind of hone in on how you become more efficient, become more lean, and become more innovative, all in the same piece of it. So not only selecting a software that matches that, but also understanding the additional applications that support your specific food and beverage distribution, food and beverage manufacturing, all kinds of different pieces in there. So it's a very complex industry, and it really does take kind of that specialist to walk you through all of the nuances of what that means as far as enterprise supportive technology.
Yeah, there's just so many complexities. I mean, you've got traceability, regulatory issues. You've got the whole unit of measure conversion thing, which is, you buy raw materials in one unit of measure, but then you're selling the end product in a different unit of measure. For example, you might have 16 ounces of something in a final product that constitutes one unit of a can or a box or whatever. So it sounds simple enough if you're in that industry, but that's a big, that creates a lot of challenges sometimes with technology and process flows in terms of how you convert those units and measure without breaking the production scheduling and the raw material forecasting and all that stuff.
And it sounds like, building on that, Eric, that not only is it important for all organizations before they go through digital transformation in kind of that phase zero work to sit down and say, okay, what is our future state? What do we want our target operating model to look like, and map that out? But it seems like from Wayne's experience and recommendations, it's even more important for complex organizations such as food and beverage organizations to do that before selecting a software, so they can monitor and optimize any breakages or create awareness under understanding special requirements.
Yeah, and that starts with the design, the process definition, the design of the technology, the testing of the technology, user acceptance testing, training. It has to flow all the way through all these important critical steps in the process. It's true for any organization, but food, I'd say the stakes are higher, partially because of the complexities you talk about, but also if you can't produce food, that's usually a bigger deal than if you can't produce, some discretionary product that people don't necessarily need. When it's food, there's, people are usually more sensitive to those sort of outages or production issues. So you're absolutely right. It's really important.
And Wayne had mentioned that lower margin, the less tolerance for risk disruption. And, if you have a distribution blockage and a truck full of oranges, those oranges don't have a shelf life except for a few hours to get to a different refrigerated area, especially in regulatory. And that margin isn't huge and high for that. So the risk tolerance for those organizations from his overall insight is less.
Absolutely. Yeah, very much so. And it's even more important to make sure you've got a solid blueprint and implementation plan that mitigates those risks and takes those into consideration.
Yeah. And, I did ask him if he gets samples at every business he works for. And if you knew some of the client names that we had in that portfolio, you'd be very excited for him to get some some samples. So we both decided that the next time we do a case study around food and beverage, we're going to need to get some snacks from all of our additional food and beverage clients. But in all seriousness, such an important conversation, especially around the nuances in software when it comes to food and beverage. And just a reminder, I don't know that we did a great job in letting our audience know, Wayne will consult on other areas of our global business. He's part of our global team. So it's not like you have to be located in the APAC region if you do have questions about our food and beverage components. We have many clients in food and beverage throughout the world. And he acts as, an expert across our global teams too. So just a reminder, if you do have questions on that, you can feel free to reach out to him directly or reach out to me or the organization, and we can kind of take you through our experience there.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. Well, a good place to leave it too. Reach out to any of us and we can chat with you about other case studies within or outside of food and beverage as well. Well, good. Well, thank you for a great episode here today, Kyler. Thank you to Khalid and Wayne for being on the show. Thank you to the audience for the participation and the interest in the content and the great questions in the chat fields. Really appreciate it. And just a reminder, you can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, as well as audio podcast platforms throughout the world. Be sure to subscribe, leave us a review. We love to hear your feedback. So thank you for being here. We'll look forward to seeing you next week on Transformation Ground Control. Have a great week in the meantime. I said episodes plural. I think that's right.
I actually didn't even notice, so I would say it was fine.
Nice. That's what I like to hear. You have options to work with here, Cassie. You're welcome. That's what we do. We're here to make your life easier.
Flexible.
Okay.